Says it's streaming live, so.
Yep, and I'll show you that on the, it's still preparing to stream. Okay.
Are we all set?
Yes, sir.
Says it's streaming live, so.
Yep, and I'll show you that on the, it's still preparing to stream.
Joe, I got your email.
So are we ready, Stephanie?
Yes, sir.
All right, well then we will go ahead and call the town council meeting to order. We're going to dispense with the, I know it's still on the agenda, we're going to dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance since I don't know any of us have a flag here and that will be awkward. So we'll go straight into the approval of minutes. And the first is the, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the town council meeting of March 3rd, 2020?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any comments, changes, edits?
No.
No.
I'll take that as none. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, second, the minutes of the special call town council meeting of March 25th, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any changes, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of minutes of the special call town council meeting of March 3rd, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Did I hear one?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, they're approved. What's obvious that is that 20, I keep waiting to hear somebody's second, but I figured out, Stephanie, that must be that we have a 20-second lag. So people aren't hearing the prior person's comment. Mayor's update. There are a couple things that I want to update the town council on. The first one involves a agenda change. Item B on today's agenda to consider approval of ordinance 20-03, an ordinance regulating the use of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. We had intended to have a first reading. Everyone will recall we discussed this both in our strategy meeting back in February or January, and then had asked to have Jim Jordan come forth with a recommendation and proposal. Unfortunately, at the end of the day yesterday, I received a communication from a part of Clemson University, which has, as I have understood it, is been authorized to act on behalf of the state of South Carolina with respect to certain aspects of regulating the use of pesticides. And while it was a very cordial letter and very long, there was no doubt that it was the position of the state that local municipalities do not have authority to be able to regulate pesticides. So as a consequence, I have no choice, first of all, but to go ahead and take it off the agenda for today. So we will not discuss it when we get to that item. Having said that, it obviously, though, is something which is important to the town. I think that my sense was that town council felt pretty strongly or pretty supportive of that action. I know that I have gotten a significant amount of resident input on that. So what we will do is ask our town attorney, Joe Wilson, if he will, since he's had no chance to look at it, if he will take a look at that over the next month and we'll advise the council either something ranging from either they're correct, we do not have the latitude, to we do, or maybe there is some action in between that would muster the support of the state. So unfortunately, we will not, to anybody who's listening to this, the largest number of citizen comments that I got prior to this meeting were in fact emails about that agenda item and in support of that agenda item. So unfortunately, that will come off the agenda, and we'll find out what is involved there. The second thing, obviously, that is of importance that I just want to update everybody on is the governor's last order of last evening, in which he put forth what he's described as a stay home or work order, which I think is intended to get the state of South Carolina more in line with, at least. I think that the state of South Carolina, in terms of the actual substance of what we've been doing, has been pretty closely in line. But there clearly has been a concern that not making that sort of stay home, stay in place sort of order has been problematic. So he did that yesterday. Within that order, and we obviously have only had a few hours to review it, get a sense of how other communities are approaching it, what they think it means for them, and what, if anything, it means for us. But there are a couple specific things that are evident here. A part of that order was to specifically establish some expectations or regulations reflecting grocery stores, any stores, but in our case, the one really impacted is grocery stores, and included a limitation on occupancy, and that it instructed stores to to essentially establish an occupancy level that was the lesser of either 5 people per 1,000 square feet, or 20% of the store's occupancy as defined by the applicable fire marshal. With the intent being that the stores then take measures to ensure that there are not more people than that in the store at any point in time, which in case of most stores would mean queuing shoppers up outside and letting them in certain amounts. I talked with the manager of the store last night. He also was in a long conference call with his management to talk about an array of both that and an array of other changes that they want to put in place to address a variety of issues. The fire marshal was at the store this morning in order to take all of the relevant measures so that the fire marshal could determine what the applicable number is. And for the moment, I'm going to call this unofficial until I see it in writing. But what I am told is that the occupancy limitation for the Harris Teeter store will be 78. Stephanie, is that consistent with your number? 78 for Harris Teeter?
Yes.
So it will be 78, which is considerably, and that one is being based off the occupancy. Their fire district occupancy was about close to 400 people, 390 some people. So it's 20% of that. They did also have a square footage, which was about 29,000 square foot. But that square footage was gross. It didn't include the cutouts for, usable space. It would have resulted in a larger number than the 78. So I think the 78 is the number that they will be working towards. He also informed me that they will be looking at other changes, doing some additional markings in the store to help people better keep 6-foot distances, and so on. There is one action with respect to the store that would be helpful they believe would be helpful for us to take. And later on, when we get to item D, amending the emergency ordinance related to penalties for violations of the emergency ordinance, we can talk about all of those things. But the thrust of it is, right now, we have communicated in the past a desire on the part of the store that when you have groups of people that are together, that they limit to one person entering the store. They've had uneven success with that. A lot of people, like everything, a lot of people have been okay, and some people haven't. The real challenge will be that if he's in a position that now they have to line people up, and as an example, he has an opening, if 5 people have just gone out, so he can let 5 people in, and the first 5 people in line are 2 adults and 3 kids. He needs to be able to have the proper flow of people. He needs to be able to say to one of the adults, you go on into the store, the other 4 need to stay outside. So we will talk about it later, but they would like to see us discuss taking some action that would put some better town support and requirement behind the 1 person per group, so that when he was doing this, he wasn't simply just asking, but that he had the force of a town action behind it. So we can talk about that later. The other part of the governor's action involved essentially the stay at home. And as the governor stated in his message yesterday, that while that clearly implies, I think, an important message and a important desire in terms of what he would like to see the behavior of residents be, which is just that. If you don't need to go anywhere, don't go. But at the same time, it is not that you're confined to your house, it still allows you to engage in regular, basic activities. He did not, in his order, change at all the listing of businesses that are still allowed to be open and available for use. He, like all other state orders, continued to allow or indicate that people can be engaged in basic exercise and recreation. Mm-hmm. So I think the governor's own words were that he felt that many of the things that underlie successfully carrying out the order are already in place. But nonetheless, he's taken the action of asking for that. So that is in place, and I think as the next couple of days go by, we will get a better understanding as to whether there are any other changes that we need to make or might want to make to encourage the spirit of that change. In the short term, I don't think we've identified any at this point, except for continuing to try to stress again the basic premise that that the best way to protect the entire community is to take care of yourself by avoiding contact, and taking care of others by avoiding and not putting them in a position where they can be in contact with you. And as the governor said, limit your activities as best you absolutely can. The last thing I want to update the council on, and it will result in one of the agenda items that we added here, is that, as we all know, last week the town took action to further limit short-term rentals. Mm-hmm. And we took 2 actions. One was to specifically restrict the advertising of rental occupancy during the period of last week through May 15th. And we also shut down the actual checking in of new renters. And we are finding in the first weekend that that compliance with that is troublesome, and that we are struggling in some cases with enforcement. Now, I want to put it in the right perspective. I still have every reason to think we have 1,350 plus rentals. I have every reason to think that still the bulk of our rental owners are acting responsibly. And so the comments here are in no way derogatory or against the overwhelming number of our rentals, but it's clear that they all aren't, and we are having significant issues. Our primary issues are with individuals who rent their properties on Airbnb and VBRO, where we have a problem because in most cases we can't identify who the people are. Those sites don't put down addresses and names and so on. But we're finding large numbers of people who have not pulled their properties off of the rental off the rentals and are, as we go in and find, are in fact actively willing to rent them. They're not just not advertising them, but they are willing to rent the properties. We are enforcing vigorously. I think yesterday our code compliance officers probably issued about, I think my count was about 27 or 28 tickets. Stephanie, is that about right?
Yeah, they're up to 57.
I'm sorry?
They're up to 57.
50, so we're up to 57. And that is a combination of people who are advertising in violation of the policy. It is people who are actually renting in violation of the policy. And what really amazes me is a large number of people that we're finding who don't even, after all of the discussions of the past year, are still out there operating with any license whatsoever. I think this morning's count, I saw about 20 of them that were operating with no license. So we are working full-time on trying to identify those people. And it's important we do for two reasons. One, because obviously the reason we did this was a public health concern, the concern by our residents in the community that they wanted to see the town limited in terms of its exposure, and that it was not interested in seeing additional peoples coming into the island from all kinds of location where they may in fact be bringing a greater risk of contamination. And second, it's just flat out unfair to the majority of people who have just absolutely been fantastic about complying with this. And I get emails and from people who are frustrated, and I absolutely am with them. And they're basically out there going, look, I took my rental off the market. I believe it's the right thing to do. I think the town took the right decision, but I'm going to lose a whole bunch of money in the next 2 months. And then I can go on and see that all these people are out there just taking advantage of this. So we are working on that. And on the agenda, there are a couple items as a result of what we've discovered over the weekend that we're going to want to suggest for possible additions to our emergency order. Those are my only comments before we get into the agenda. I just ask any questions or any comment on any of those couple items.
None.
Okay. I do citizens comments. I realize we don't have the sort of ability here for people to in front of us ask citizen comments, but I did get a couple prior to the meeting, so let me address those. The bulk of them that I got from citizens had to do with the rodenticide issue, and in all cases indicating their support. And so hopefully my comments for those individuals, they understand what's going to happen here and why. But I had 4 or 5 emails of people wanting to indicate their support for that. The other area of concern that came through the comments had to do with the quarantine, the 14-day quarantine of individuals who would be coming to the island from the 4 locations of New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New Orleans. And specifically, what was the town doing to try to identify and enforce those requirements? And so the actions we're taking, and it is difficult because while the governor provided a requirement that they self-quarantine, for the most part, the enforcement capability was provided to law enforcement, which in our case is the Charleston County Sheriff's Department. And also the concept behind the quarantine was one of self-responsibility, that the family or the person or whatever took on the responsibility themselves to take the actions necessary to self-quarantine. We were not, as a town, provided with independent forms of enforcement. Having said that, we are taking this absolutely seriously. We know that if you saw the first weekend, how many emails, partly in jest and part serious, I don't know how many pictures of New York license plates I received texted to me over the Thursday, Friday of last week from various locations on the town. So here's what we are doing, and it is primarily trying to work with Kika and people going through the gate. We have prepared a flyer. It's a communication piece that we've been using for a couple weeks. It was prepared by Stephanie Braswell and Keeley. And it has on it a lot of information about the rules and regulations that we put in place. It specifically lays out the 14-day quarantine. It tells what towns and communities are involved. It lays out the expectations. It tells the person what they're supposed to do. And any automobile coming through for the first time, either for a visitor pass, a rental pass, or a guest pass, is provided that flyer. So, and also the gate people are looking at the license plates and or the driver's licenses. So they have the ability to especially point out to somebody coming through in informing them that this is the requirement and the expectation that they abide by it. That is the primary, and at this point, sole independent way the town has to inform people, except that we've asked and we know that the larger property management groups, when they were dealing with renters and guests, were trying to provide that same information to their guests that they may have bookings coming this way. For people who are using ABR or Airbnb and VBRO, I have little sense that that's probably occurring. Beyond that, we have worked with and talked extensively with our office, our Charleston County deputies on the island, and they are able to respond to, and they will respond to any situation in which a resident, property owner, a commercial establishment, if they feel that there is someone out there who is not taking proper precautions, not quarantining as they should, what we have provided is the non-emergency number, the 9411 number. I'm sorry, the 911 number. That any resident can call one of our officers directly. That officer will respond. They will go visit the people, the family, whatever, to their house. And the intent is primarily an information one, to make sure that they understand that, well, first of all, to understand whether they are in fact covered by the quarantine, because it could be somebody from New York that's been here for 3 weeks. But they ascertain whether the person is covered, and then they will inform again the person of what the law requires, what's in the governor's mandate, and what is expected, and make clear to them that that if they do not honor that, that they are subject to, again, to the penalties up to and including imprisonment. So that is the process. And I do know that there have been calls. I do know that there have been, I don't have a feel for how many, but there are residents that I know have called the officers. The officers have responded and had conversations with the people. I think the biggest lack of clarity is people are concerned about, well, what does quarantine mean? Does it mean that they have to stay locked in the door, in the house? Can they come out on the porch? Can they ride their bike up and down in front of the, and essentially what the officers are correctly telling them is that it means you're supposed to stay on your property, and you're not supposed to be out going to public places, going to the grocery store. You shouldn't be playing golf. You shouldn't be out on the boardwalks. That, the intent is that you stay at or near your property and away from other people. So that's I hope that answers the couple questions on that matter.
Craig, this is Dan. Would you verify for people or clarify that they're to dial 411 if they want to report something like this?
No, different number. It is, tell you what, I will, it's the town's 20, it ends in 1700. I'll have to get it. But I'm not going to jump up right
Okay.
now. But while I'm talking through this, maybe Stephanie's got it's on one of our officers' cards, and maybe they can pull it up. Do you have it, Stephanie?
No, I don't have it, but we'll be able to throughout this. We'll get it.
Yeah, it's a regular phone number, and I know it ends in 1700, but it's not 911 and it's not a 411. It actually gets to a dispatch that will then come out to contacts our 4 deputies or our part-time deputies on the island. It's the best way to do it.
Craig, Stephanie Braswell just sent me a note. The non-emergency number is 202-1700.
Say that again.
202-1700.
Got it. That is the number. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. With that, sorry for the very long mayor's update and citizens comments. So let's move to new business, which is a discussion by Jim Jordan, I think, of the town's deer. And I'm going to says town's deer and rodent population, but at the moment we're going to talk about the town's deer population only, I think, on this.
Okay, everybody can see me and hear me fine?
Yes, Jim.
Okay, well, I've got some slides I'm gonna put up on the screen here, so we can kind of go through this. Everybody can see that?
Yes.
Yes, Jim.
All right, here we go. So a lot of this stuff we've talked about before over the last few months, but I just wanted to kind of run back through some numbers on the deer population itself and kind of the position we're in. And then we'll get to what is our current recommendation here at the end of this. So as you can see, again, you've seen this slide. Deer numbers are going up quite a bit here in the last couple of years. The other thing we look at, obviously when we're monitoring a deer population, is how high the recruitment rate is. So how many new deer are added to the population every year? And we do that by looking at the ratio of fawns to does. And so when that is high, that means that more new deer are added to the population. Typically, if you see that, you're going to see an increasing population, just like we are.
Hey, Jim, on
Yes, sir.
my screen, all of our pictures are on the right-hand side, so I don't
Yes.
see 2019. So what was the fawn deer ratio in 2019?
Yeah, let me, let's see here. If I do this. See if I can shrink it for you.
That works. Thank you.
That works.
Yep, that works.
Okay, so we were at 0.559 in 2019. And then just to go back to the density slide, if you couldn't see 19, that was 111 deer per square mile.
Do you have a range or a band that you're most comfortable in?
Yep, I'm going to get to that at the very end as part of the recommendation.
Okay.
So just a quick summary again. In 2019, we were at 111 deer per square mile. That's a 58% increase in the last 2 years. And these surveys don't provide us with a very accurate estimate of numbers, but we get a general estimate, and that's around 900 deer. And then we talked about the fawn to doe ratios. Again, we saw our 3 highest on record in the last 4 years. So why are our deer numbers going up? What's going on? Well, we've got more fawns that are surviving, and that is caused in part and probably primarily by a decline in our bobcat population. So typically bobcats would have kept a large percentage of deer fawns from surviving. And now with fewer bobcats, we've got more fawns and therefore more deer. So I wanted to step back just real quick and talk a little bit about deer biology and kind of how they work. And so obviously deer are a prey species, so they are out there for other things to eat them. Because of that, their strategy is they produce offspring to offset those losses. And they do that pretty much no matter what the environmental conditions are. So they can't regulate their own numbers like a lot of predators can, right? So if you're a wolf and you live out there and there's not much food for you, you might not have new wolves that year. You might shut down your breeding so that you don't eat up all the food that's out there. Deer don't do that. They'll keep reproducing every year, even if they start to run out of food. So because of that, and because of what we're seeing with bobcats, we're pretty confident that the population is going to keep going up for the foreseeable future, at least. And so we talked about this at our retreat, but I just wanted to run over kind of the two main strategies that communities like ours would look at in terms of managing their deer numbers. The first one is fertility control. That one's very, very expensive. It's not honestly a viable population technique. In free ranging deer, it can work in, closed populations in a fenced in area, potentially, still very expensive. And in fact, one of the first things the town did back in the late 90s, early 2000s was we did look at a fertility control test here on the island. We did it for 4 years. We saw limited success. I mean, it actually worked okay the first year or two, and then it got harder and harder to deliver those treatments. And so overall, we pretty much decided that it really wasn't going to work long term. So we moved away from that. The second, strategy would be to lethally remove deer. You can't trap them, you can't relocate them. So if you want fewer deer, your second big option is to lethally remove them from the island. And so that would normally be done, in some cases with hunting. If you had large tracts of land, obviously we do not. So hunting is not really an option here at Kiowa. So the second strategy is sharpshooting. And the state has a program for this. They accept applications, they issue permits and tags. Those tags are valid from September 15th to March 1st. In order to do this, you need specialized equipment. You're doing this at night, you're using weapons that don't make a lot of noise. And then under those permits, all of that meat has to go to a charitable organization. And so the last slide is some discussions that Aaron and I have had over the last month or two. We discussed it in the environmental committee last month as well. And what we are proposing is to reduce and maintain Kiowa's deer population at or below 80 deer per square mile. And that we would recommend utilizing sharpshooting to do that. Again, that work would be conducted entirely at night under state permit. It would use suppressed weapons. Shooting would only be done in pre-scouted locations only. So in other words, we would decide the spots that were 100% safe to lethally remove a deer. And those are the only locations where we would then shoot deer. So we're going to talk about the budget a little bit later. I have budgeted currently as if we were going to conduct this program in the coming year. So that could start as early as September. We probably wouldn't do it until later in the fall. But so just to kind of run through the costs. So the first year we would need a fair amount of equipment to get up and running. And so what we're estimating is around $12,000. It may end up being less than that. But somewhere in that ballpark.
Jim, if I can ask you, that assumes that somehow the town is the one doing this. I mean, are there people? I mean, can you just like anything else put an RFP out and a contract? And are there an array of people who do this for a fee and then we're not into the business of buying equipment?
Yeah, that's certainly possible. I will tell you that, there are probably less than 20 communities in the state that operate under this permit. There may be a few more than that. And I'm only aware of a small company on Hilton Head, or it may just be an individual that does this work. And then there's a company in the Low Country, and I'm not aware of anyone else in the state of South Carolina. So while you could attempt to to go out for bid, it's a very specialized, it's a specialized skill. And while you might get a lot of people who would put in a bid, you would have to be extremely careful that you got someone with a vast
Sure.
amount of experience doing this type of work. And that's going to be hard to find.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And so I think, so we were talking about the cost of processing. So obviously these deer have to be donated to a charitable organization. The going rate for that is around $80 per deer. So that includes everything, including delivering it to the appropriate charity. So if we were going to remove 100 deer in the first year, that would cost about $20,000 or $200 per deer. Obviously, that includes the $12,000 upfront equipment cost. And then after that, there would be no need to purchase additional equipment. So the cost per deer would go down to about 100, maybe a little bit less, maybe closer to 90 in future years once the equipment is on hand.
Hey, Jim,
Yes, sir.
quick question. The 100 deer, is that just a number you used for illustrative purposes, or is that sort of the number you had in mind that would bring it down to the 80 deer per square mile?
Yeah, so 100, I think, would be a good number to start with. So yes, that is a recommendation to start with 100. Obviously, we would continue doing our surveys so that we know, basically what that density is doing. And so then next year, or this coming fall and winter, we would see what our density is after the removal. And then that would help us kind of fine tune our numbers going forward.
Jim, another question on the pre-scouted shooting locations. Are those secret, or does the public know? Would the public be notified where those are?
I mean, you could probably do it either way. I would say in all the programs I'm familiar with, that information is not made public. But it could be. But it's probably not a good idea.
What is the, obviously people are trained to do this, but I mean, I look at our island and we have a lot of people and a lot of properties. So the obvious question is, how is this done in a manner that that you are absolutely certain that the public is not endangered in any way while you're taking out 100 deer?
Sure. So I don't know if you all know, but Seabrook has been involved in a program like this since about 05, 06. And they've removed quite a large number of deer over there without any safety issues. And it's pretty much following this protocol. You were setting up shots at a deer so that, number one, you can see everything in front of the deer, you can see everything behind the deer, and you know that your bullet is either going into a raised area of dirt, and often these shots are set up on golf courses where you have elevated tee boxes. And so you basically are using bait to move deer into locations such as that so that you can 100% safely shoot. But a lot of this work is also done from tree stands. So some of it is done, you're out in a vehicle at night. A lot of it is also done from tree stands. So you're 16 feet up in the air, shooting straight down, wooded lot with, again, no safety concerns. So,
Jim, this is Dan. Prior to the virus, let me say this, the most common concern I hear from residents, both full-time and part-time, is the tremendous growth of the deer population. Everybody loves the deer, but when you drive home in the evening and there's a fair chance you're either going to run into one or you're going to stop 3 or 4 times to avoid them. Everyone's concern seems to be the tremendous growth of the deer population. Not that they don't love deer, but there's way too many. So we need to consider something like this.
Jim, I'd like to know how you select the people that are going to do the shooting. Where are they
In
from?
my,
Are they,
in my current proposal, it would be me. So we've had, that is, how it is budgeted now is if I was performing the work myself.
And
And
Jim,
I've been doing this for 20 plus years. So I'm quite qualified to run a program like this.
Jim,
Is it-
you of course know this better, but I know we have something like this up in Connecticut, and they use bow and arrow. The rifle is preferable.
good question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, not to give too much detail, but obviously, what we want to do is lethally harvest the animal as humanely as possible. And so bow hunting, while considered humane, is certainly not as humane as a shot that is immediately fatal.
Got
Right?
it.
So you want a technique that is going to make that deer go from, eating and roaming free to dead, basically.
Jim, obviously when we started responding to a lot of the concerns of residents and on this, the concerns were in two different directions. One was sort of the impact that deer were having on the environment. And I don't just mean people's, plants and annuals and stuff, but the concern that the deer population was such now that they were really doing damage to plants and infrastructure. They were overeating. And then the other side of this is the potential public safety issue, the concern that there are just so many deer right now that, I mean, any of us who have driven down Governor's Drive anytime in the last 2 months have probably slammed on our brakes once or twice. At the end of the day, in your evaluation, the driver for doing, if we were communicating to, because some people are not going to be real happy with this, when we were to communicate what the benefit is and why this is of importance to do, how do you weigh the ecological drivers and impact versus the public health impact? And on the public health impact, there's obviously the question, the person will come back to you and say, well, fine, you kill 100 deer, but how do you know that you got the 100 deer that are hanging out at the corner of the second gate? How do you answer those questions? And at the end of the day, what's your comfort that when you do this, we've effectively solved a problem?
Yeah, so very good question. We did a survey of our residents back in October, and the biggest concerns we heard from residents, number one, was public safety. It was mainly deer vehicle. That was a big concern. Second was, diseases like Lyme disease that deer are involved in.
I can't hear you, Jim.
You can't hear me?
That's better.
Okay, and then third was, a concern over deer eating plants in their yard. And I think the justification for the program is 100% public safety and public health. The fact that deer are eating things in people's yards was not a consideration, honestly, in my recommendation to remove deer. It is done, it is recommended in hopes of reducing deer vehicle collisions, being probably the primary reason. And so to do that, you would target problem areas. So you would specifically try to remove deer from areas where they tend to get hit by cars. And you would remove deer from areas that have more deer than others, right? So we're not going to be out removing deer, at the far end of Cougar Island or out on Little Bear Island. Right? We're going to be removing these deer where they are potentially a public safety or public health risk.
How long would it take to address 100 deer?
I would guess about 7 days, probably a week.
And that was with one person?
Correct. I would need some assistance and
Right. Okay.
some other things, but yes. 7 to 10 days.
Jim, if the council wanted to move forward in this direction, it strikes me there are two ways to approach this. One is for us to do just simply deal with the one-time situation, a recommendation to cull our deer population by some number, whether that be 100, or there's a different approach, which is you've laid out essentially some guidelines, some parameters that say that long-term deer population ought to be within a certain range. So another approach would be to do a longer-term sort of recommendation here that says that what we're really adopting is a deer herd target, and essentially then monitoring, and any time that the deer density goes above whatever limit we agree to, that would essentially trigger another evaluation and town consideration of whether to do something again. Have you thought about whether there's a preferred approach here? Are you looking for us to approve culling 100 deer in a one-time period, or would you also be looking for us to do something longer term that says that we adopt some policy of herd size, which would also then drive further future years?
Yeah, I think that, obviously the intent coming in was, I have a recommendation, I budgeted for that recommendation. So initially it was, just getting approval to get this going the first year, but I think you're absolutely right. I pretty much laid it out. 80 deer per square mile is a good target. If y'all are comfortable saying, okay, 80 deer is where 80 deer per square mile is where we want to be. Again, I think that's a good number. And that anytime we trigger that, we would take action, which could be, could be the same type of action we're talking about now. Potentially down the road could be something different. But I think, the hope here, is that while we might have to continue doing something like this for a long time, I'm really proud of the fact that for the last 20 years, we're one of the few, coastal communities in South Carolina that has not had to remove deer. I mean, that's because we've had bobcats doing it for us. So I'm hoping that the issue with bobcats is temporary, and that we can, I think what we saw, 20 plus years ago when I started, when our deer numbers were really high, bobcats were eating deer, but they weren't maintaining the population. They weren't bringing it down. So my hope is that we get numbers down to the point, and bobcats back up to the point where we can get back into that natural predation system that, Kiowa is known for. And I think we can. Obviously one of the steps was hoping to, deal with rodenticides, which, we're still dealing with in other ways now. So yes, I think I would be happy with a long-term recommendation or approval.
Well, at this point, why don't I ask, because we don't have a motion on the table. So at this point, maybe why don't I ask, I would do this. Jim, why don't you describe specifically what you would like to see the town council approve, and lay that out. Then I will ask whether I have any council member who would like to make a motion and a second to that effect. And then if so, then let's open it up to discussion of the entire council.
Okay. Well, my recommendation would be that the town adopt a population goal for our deer of 80 deer per square mile, and that we take appropriate action to keep those numbers in that vicinity long term, while continuing to monitor the population as well.
Okay.
And would that include a carrying out a specific program in the fall of this year to start to reach that, go to essentially call approximately 100, I assume to be updated
Correct.
close to that time, but to call approximately 100 in September, October range.
Correct. And that money is currently in the budget to do that, as I've recommended, based on the recommendation today.
All right. Do I have a council member who would want to make a motion to that effect?
I would be willing to move forward with a motion to that effect. So moved.
Do I have a second?
I will second that.
All right, well then I will open it up for discussion, and why don't I, so that we aren't talking over each other, I'll just kind of go around and ask everybody. So Dan, you made the motion. Any comments or thoughts you would like to add?
Well, a couple of things. I think, first of all, Jim Jordan is probably as equipped as anybody we could have on the island to conduct such a program. He's got a long history on the island. He does understand the balance of nature and how it's out of balance right now. And a program like this, under his not only leadership, but he's the one who would actually conduct the program, would, in my opinion, be a very smart move for the island. And I would have great confidence in Jim managing the program itself.
Claus, you seconded?
I agree with what Dan said on all counts.
All right, just going around the dial here. Chris?
Yeah, I think Dan summed it up perfectly. I share those thoughts and those sentiments. I don't do it with any great joy in my heart, but you got to trust the expert to do what's the logical thing to do. So I'll support it.
Mary Ann?
I'm glad we're having this discussion today because this will give our residents a chance to express their own feelings about this. I personally don't like the idea that we're going to be shooting deer. I know the population of deer is a problem, and certainly a number of people I've known have had accidents on the parkway with the deer. But I wish there was another solution, and honestly, I don't have one yet. So I'm just happy at this point, people have an opportunity to express their concerns or their support, and I look forward to reading about that.
Stephanie, let me ask one question as a part of this. I know that implicit in the way that Jim has described this, the thought is that he would be doing the activity because, and I understand, I mean, Jim's done this for Seabrook for some time. And it's very likely if it went out for bid, he would probably still be maybe the only bidder. But under our requirements for advertising and bidding services, Stephanie, do we have to separate this? Do we have the ability to make that decision now, or do we make the decision that we want to move forward with a program? And do we need to then separately deal with the question of addressing whether there are in fact other entities that are or are not willing and bid this out? Because I want to make sure that this is no comment to Jim's qualifications or not, but I also want to make sure I don't get on the wrong side of our requirements from the town standpoint in terms of bidding out services.
Yeah, so to answer that, and Joe, feel free to chime in. Based on our procurement, this could be set up as something that is basically, I don't know the exact terminology, but a specialized use where there's not a lot of vendors or contractors to pull from. And we would not necessarily have to bid this out. We would be required to at least try to get 3 proposals. Say, for instance, Jim, if he gives me the names of some, I can reach out to them and see if that's something they'd be willing to do and to give us a cost. But we're not required to bid this out because it's such a considered more of a kind of a service that we're not going to get a lot of bids from. So we're okay with moving forward. To answer your question, Joe, you may want to chime in. what I would probably recommend, just to be on the safe side, is that we do try to see if we can get with that, see if we can get at least 3 bid proposals, and Jim may be one of, of course, he may be one of them, because Jim, would you be doing this you'll be doing this as an employee, right? Not as your business, correct?
Absolutely. So I guess I would argue that.
Okay,
Right,
that's
my
all you
job
know
is-
for right now.
No, I'm just saying, my job description is that I am hired to, one of
Right,
them
but
is
that's all
manage wildlife populations. So yes,
Okay,
this
that's
would
all I
be-
would need, Jim, right now. So,
Okay, because that wasn't clear.
yeah.
It wasn't clear to me that you were doing it as part of your employee, under your employee responsibility as
Right.
opposed to part of your business. So
right, it would be under his
I don't have the
employment
same concern
responsibility.
in that case.
Yeah,
As long as I'm fine with it if it's as an employee, as long as we then check to make sure from an insurance coverage standpoint, we have no issues there with in terms of liability from the town standpoint when we're, okay. So I have a,
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Just to point out, just for public purposes, I did have Dorota look into the insurance piece, and based on our insurance, we do believe that we'll be covered liability because this will fall under his job description, because Jim is licensed and trained. So we do feel comfortable that this will be covered under our liability insurance.
got it. Okay. All right. So with that, we have a motion, a second. All in favor? Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so it carries 4-1. What I would ask, Jim, is since you're looking at this occurring in September, I would want to make sure 2 things happen beforehand, that Stephanie Braswell work with you as we get close, probably in the summer. I mean, we'll communicate something, obviously, because we've approved this, but I would want some sort of communication closer to September that really communicates, clarifies what's being done, what the rationale is, because we shouldn't kid ourselves. I think, like everything on this island, there are going to be people who absolutely have been looking for us to take this action. I get a lot of emails about what are we going to do about the deer, but also there are going to be people who don't like this, especially when they realize that culling deer does not mean putting them in a fancy truck and driving them off the island, but it means eliminating and killing them. So I want to make sure we have a good communication. And then I would want probably a month before we're ready to do this, if you would come back to council and just review with them a very detailed execution plan so they understand exactly what's going to happen with respect to when, where, how many, how people are going to be communicated to, that gets reviewed again with the council before we do it. And if any of the other council members have any additional comments or cautions, add them in.
Mayor, I have one question.
Sure.
Once you shoot the deer and you're going to be doing this in a 1-week period, where do you take the carcasses? I know the meat would be given for charity, which is good, but what do you do with them after you shoot them?
Yeah, so they're delivered straight to the deer processor. Obviously, they go straight into a refrigerated location, and then he handles all the aspects of it from that point, including
And is
packaging.
that near us or?
The one that I would typically use is in Somerville.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jim, one question, I'm getting on my email some questions from people. So I think I know the answer to this. As you pick out the areas, do you do this, does it tend to be concentrated in certain areas of the island, or is it fairly well dispersed?
So in deciding on where we would remove deer, we would look at our spotlight survey data and figure out areas that have the most deer, number one. And then second would be where we have the most deer vehicles. So we're doing this to target and try to eliminate or minimize, issues that we have. So that's how we would decide.
Okay.
I have one comment only. I don't know if Jim agrees or not, but the issue was raised before would locations and times be public or not? I would strongly urge that if this is passed, very public that we passed it, I think the details afterward, including when and where, is not something that should be broadly disseminated.
Right.
Okay.
All right, can I let you know tomorrow, like you said about, well, how many hours are it?
Am I hearing somebody's?
There's some background noise.
There's some background voice.
Yeah, I heard from somewhere. All right, so we are done with that. Let's move on to the next item then, which is the noise ordinance. This is to consider approval of ordinance 2020-04, an ordinance to amend the municipal code of the town of Kiawah Island, South Carolina, Article 15, general offenses, chapter 3. And it has to do with prohibited noise. And this is a first reading of an ordinance. The background for people who may be listening but didn't listen last month, this was discussed in general at the last town council meeting, but was not at that time in the form of a formal ordinance. The short story behind this is that the town has had an ordinance affecting noise for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. This is not a new ordinance. It has existed for many years. And it is similar in some cases to the community association, who also has noise ordinances. An issue has arisen in the last year or so in that there is a provision. It's a rather typical noise ordinance. It says that there are a number of occasions when you can't disturb the peace, and it lies out a number of different prohibitions, things like loudspeakers and amplifiers and what to do about domestic barking dogs, yelling, shouting, the typical kinds of things. But also there has always been in the ordinance a specific provision that said, and the actual words were, any sound that registers, what it said was that any sound that could be heard across a property line was prohibited. And that was from the hours of 11 at night to 7 in the morning. It didn't describe the kind of sound. It didn't describe how long the sound took place. It didn't describe how long. It just said any. And we ran into some issues of a location which had running equipment related to the business that would run all night, and it was disturbing the neighbors in nearby residential properties. The establishment worked at length, and I think in good faith, to try to alleviate the sound levels. But at the end of the day was still not to get it to a level that was satisfactory to the residents, but more importantly, could not get it to zero. And the concern of the residents was that the town has an ordinance that says 0, and that we needed to enforce it. The position that the town was in is that 0 is unenforceable. There is just no place on the island where we would be able to say no sound can move from one property line to the other. Anybody's heat pump that kicks on at 2 in the morning would violate that policy and could result in the next door neighbor wanting to have a ticket written. It was not going to be. It was just a poorly written ordinance that had never become a problem. But now it has. So the recommendation here, and I'll turn this over to Joe, I think, in a minute. The recommendation was to, having looked at how other communities address this, to actually put in a specific decibel limit that relates only to the nighttime noise. So the change here, which is in the first paragraph, adds the term, in addition, any sound that registers more than 60 decibels at the nearest complainant's property line is prohibited between the hours of 10 p.m. and 11 a.m. Decibels are measured in the A-weighted network scale. This was discussed last month. At that time, what we asked, because there is not a clear there are a number of alternatives for decibel levels that you could choose. The EPA lists them. Some municipalities and their ordinances have 40, 50, 60. The EPA lists different kinds of decibels for different environments. So the request was to our town attorney and also I think with involvement from our building services group to take a look at this and suggest back to us for approval, not only the changed policy, but what decibel level they would recommend be included. This, of course, is a first reading. So with the inclusion of this, if it is approved, it would be clearly communicated out to the community. They would have a month to think about and provide input before a second reading in a month. Joe, I think probably I'll turn it, I don't know if you have any comments, but I'll turn it over to you. And if you have any thoughts about where and why you think the 60 and the way we've done this is the way to go.
Yeah, so it's definitely from a legal standpoint better to have a objective measurement like a decibel level. So I would encourage that. The 60 decibels is I don't want to say entirely a placeholder, but it's pretty close to being a placeholder and can certainly be adjusted by council. I provided, and it's been attached to the agenda, a chart from a model code ordinance that was circulated some time ago. And if you look, since we're talking about nighttime levels here, that chart, it's at page 30 of the PDF I'm looking at. I know we've had a couple of different agendas. That chart shows actually the most common nighttime limit is probably 50, but they're just really spread out all over, with the majority being between 45 and 60. So that's really up to council. The other issue that I put in there, and it's just one that we've looked at, I've looked at with other municipalities, is where you measure that sound. I've put in just the property line of the closest complainant. Of course, that could be changed to being, 100 yards away or 50 yards away. So that's kind of where it's at.
And just for the council members and also for anybody who's watching this, I mean, the question may be, well, what kinds of occurrences, where on the island is this pertinent? And for the most part, because again, we're talking about 11 at night to 7, 11 to 7, I think it is. Essentially, we're talking in most cases around some sort of running equipment. So it could be, for example, pool equipment. You got a neighbor who's got a pump and filter system that is running at an exceptionally high level of noise. It could be people who are near commercial establishments that potentially have heating air coolers running. It could be around things like utility system equipment where there are pumps that are permanently running. It could be air conditioning systems, although my sense is that in most cases the AC units are running either less than this or it's just a short-term intermittent. It isn't a long-term thing. So so this is most often the cases. The incident that caused this to become an issue was pool equipment. So those are the kinds of things. And if you look around the island, the big areas, you know, the river course and Cacique, well, Cacique isn't in the town anyway, so it's not affected. But the river course is really pretty far separated from residential homes, so it's probably got limited liability. The beach club is closer. It might have some, although we've never had a complaint there. So this is not got lots of applicability around the island, but nonetheless, it obviously has had in this one case. Let me do this again. Let me then with that, why don't I ask for a motion to approve in a second? And if so, then we can have conversation about the proposal overall. And I think then the issue, the 60, and if we're comfortable with the amendment, is that the right number? Do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Dan seconds it. All right, well, let me open it then to discussion. And I think we're interested in two things. One, do we agree or not agree that we should take some sort of action and clean up with this ordinance? And then second, where do we stand with respect to the proposal of 60 decibels? And again, remembering this is a first reading, so we have the ability, if we get input and discussion over the next month, to amend or adjust any aspects of those.
I think it's, Mayor,
Marianne?
I think it's important that we have the noise ordinance, and especially with the code enforcement and the efforts that we're making to minimize some of the problems that we've had in the past. Whether it should be at 60 decibels or not, I really don't know. I'm not an expert, so I'll go with the advice of others on that.
Chris, any comments?
Have we measured where this became an issue as to what the noise is under a normal circumstance today with the efforts that were undertaken for noise abatement?
We did, Chris, over a period of about a year or 2 years, there have been multiple readings taken at different times. There's a lot of variation only because that entity made a lot of structural changes. When they first started, it was very loud, and I'm guessing that the decibels were in the plus 60 range. They went back and made architectural changes, operational changes. They built baffling around the baffling, not buffling, baffling around the areas. And at that point, Stephanie, you may have the numbers, but they tended to be down in the 35 or 45 decibel range, I think.
Okay, and have we done the same thing for instance, near the Turtle Point Villas, to make sure we're not enacting an ordinance that suddenly puts the resort or some other entity in violation on day one?
We have, and the readings, if I recall, there are under 60.
Okay.
They're closer to 35 or 40.
Yeah, I have no objections at all to the ordinance. You have to clean it up, so I'm supportive as long as we're not stepping in it.
And I think to your point, Chris, one of the things we probably would do is if the agreement for the first reading is 60 or whatever, that would probably be a good exercise for us to have Bruce and Building Services do, is go back to there's probably 10 or 12 spots on the island where we might want to go back, do some readings, so that at second reading you had the benefit of what those were.
Good.
Can I just chime in? Because I do have a page listing some of the readings, and most of the readings are in the 30s to 40s at
They are
11,
now,
20.
yeah.
There are a few from a different location that go up into the 50s, but the majority of them are in the 40s.
I mean, interestingly, on one of these locations, if you sit on if you sit on the back deck, I think the ocean reading is about 30 or something like that. So, but having said that, it's a different kind of sound, and I will admit that listening to a ocean at 30 and a water pump at 30 are two different experiences. But
Yeah.
but that's where zero becomes pretty difficult. I mean, even the ocean is 30 or 40 decibels at certain times. Dan, any comments?
No, I think this is a good move. I think it makes no sense to leave the current one in place. It's unenforceable. It doesn't make sense. And 60 is a good starting point. Let's go for it.
Klaus?
I'm good with that.
All right. Okay. If there is no more discussion, then we have a motion to approve in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
No, I did not hear any opposed. All right. The motion on first reading passes, and we will review this again in a month. And Stephanie Braswell, I think what I would ask is that between now and the next council meeting, let's do some communication on this so that we are ensured that people know what we've approved, and if there are people who would like to comment on this between second reading, we get those comments. All right, we now are moving to item D, to consider amending emergency ordinance 2020-02 section 6 related to penalties for violation of the emergency ordinance. This is really on here today as a discussion item. There are no proposals for us to vote on. The purpose here is to talk about some of the experiences we are having with the COVID-19 actions that we've taken, and explore whether there are any additional things that we need to do. If we decide that, the proposal would be that overnight, Stephanie Tillerson and Joe Wilson, our attorney, could work in concert with creating specific changes or amendments to our existing emergency order, and then we can always meet in the same fashion for a emergency call to vote on those changes. So I just want to I'll throw out a couple different things that have arisen, and I think this is just open for general discussion. I want everybody to kind of talk about what they're hearing, what their concerns are. The first one is with regard to the grocery store. I mentioned that that McMaster's order impacts their operation. They are now going to be, excuse me, required starting at 5 o'clock today to keep the store below what we think is 78 people. I don't have any sense, that store's really been a lot better position the last week, a lot less people in it. So I have no sense that at 5 o'clock they're going to have people lined up out the door. But they also know that they do have great variation in their times of occupancy, and they've got Good Friday and Easter weekend coming up, which they have major concerns about. The the intent of the store, in talking with the manager last night, is that they will, when they are over capacity, they will line shoppers up probably by the produce store, have a one in, one exit in, and one exit out, and that as a group of people, they don't know if they can do it every one or when groups of 5 come out, but as people come out, then they will let the next group of shoppers in. The concern that they have, and that they would have communicated they would like the council's action if we can support them, is that for some time we have told, at their request, we have told the public that when there are families or groups or multiple groups of people, that they would like to have one person go in the store and the other people stay out, because the whole families going in was crowding the store. They've had some okay cooperation with that, but it hasn't been continual. Their big concern is going to be the situation, which they know they'll have, where 5 people exit the store so they can let 5 people in. There's a line, and the next 5 people all happen to be a family of 2 parents and 3 kids, and they want the ability to be able to say, hey, we're not going to use up the whole next 5 people going in with the entire family. 1 person go in and the other 4 go do something. And they would like to, they would feel much more comfortable if the town could take an action that would make this an official requirement, as opposed to just something that we said, hey, everybody, would like you to do this. They would like to be in a position where, as they try to enforce this, they are enforcing a requirement that has been incorporated into our emergency order, and also consequently, if they had to at any point in time, could make use of either a code compliance officer or other support in order to enforce. So that's the first issue. And I guess I would ask Stephanie and Joe whether they have any comments on whether we have the ability to accommodate that and how we would do it. And then the council members, your thoughts and views on trying to support them with this.
Joe, as a town attorney, would you go ahead and comment on that, please?
Nice pass, Stephanie.
Yeah, I do think we have the ability to do that, subject to some of the issues that I've been raising in our executive session, but that is something I believe is within the town's police powers to do.
Okay, and would that require us essentially amending, adding another amendment to the sort of running 2002 our emergency order?
Yes.
Council members, let me just go around. Mary Ann, your thoughts?
Well, I understand that Harris Teeter has started to implement the new requirements, and it seems to me they're doing everything they can to minimize crowds in their store. If they want support from us, then certainly we should provide it.
Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, they remain the pinch point on the island. So I'm apt to predisposed to help them in any way they're asking. So I would be supportive.
Dan?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think they're doing everything they can. I was at the store at 11 o'clock this morning. They're already setting up their exterior line and marking off the places where you'd have to stand. I do think it's very difficult for them when a family, as you described, walked in to say to them, we don't want you to come in the store. I mean, these are customers. They need customers. If they could turn to an official declaration by the town that they can't do that, I'm sure they would feel a lot better. And actually, I think the recipient of the information would feel like, okay, well, they don't have any choice, so they would obey it. Good idea.
Claudes?
Yes, I agree. I think they need our help.
I'm hearing, I don't think I need to take a vote. I'm hearing a view from the council that if our town administrator and town attorney could put together a properly worded addition to our emergency order, we could then in the next day add that in there. I certainly support it. I've spent a lot of time over there the last 2 weeks or more talking with them about the different issues, and they've tried, I don't think most residents realize it, but the senior hours, I think that came primarily from this store. We urged early on that they push that up their corporate ladder because they don't have the latitude locally to really take any independent action. And so I do think that the locals, Harris Teeter here was very much behind the initial success they got in getting the 2 senior hour per week. They clearly are wanting to be able to make this limitation, the number of people store workable, but I think they really are concerned that if they have their employees solely standing out there with this being purely a Harris Teeter policy, that they in some cases are going to have one hand tied behind their back in trying to administer it, and that they benefit from being able to say that this is a requirement that has been put in place by the town, and that it in fact is not optional or not a suggestion, but is in fact a requirement. I also had provided, having talked to them a couple of weeks or earlier this week, 3 or 4 other things that we had talked about with them doing. One of them was to have us require that they do various markings within the store to ensure that people had could stay 6 feet apart in key areas like around registers and so on. In my conversation, Kroger had a corporate discussion last night. They've already agreed on their own to do that. So I don't recommend, and I'm not suggesting we need to add that to our language, because it looks like they are already in the process of doing that. So I think at the moment, if they could combine this queuing process with having some real enforcement capability, they're good. They are concerned clearly about needing this capability before Thursday, because their experience says Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are going to be could be very, very tough days for them, even though the island appears like things have lessened up at Harris Teeter. It's Good Friday, Easter weekend.
Yeah,
So-
it's Good Friday, Easter weekend, and no one's going out. Everyone's going to be at home eating.
Right.
Right.
Mayor,
Right. There are still, based on the numbers that I get from some of the rental companies who are not renting, but are now also manage the properties that the owners are now coming in and using. Their perception is that there are still a not insignificant number of part-time owners and their families who are still yet to come onto the island, probably over the holiday weekend. So Stephanie, you and Joe will work on that language, and can we presume that we would then convene by phone tomorrow to approve whatever you propose?
Yes.
Joe,
Mayor,
that-
one last thing. It might be helpful
that's
if one
fine.
of our sheriffs is over there during the Thursday, Friday time, just to make sure there's no problems.
Good suggestion, Marianne. And they have been there for
Right.
occasionally the senior hours, and we would, particularly the first couple of days, ask that on occasion we have our deputies in the vicinity if needed for help. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Joe, did you start to say something? I thought.
Yeah, I just said okay to
Sorry,
your
John.
proposal. That would work
Second-
something for tomorrow.
Right, sorry, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Just so I understand that, so we all agree that this would be very helpful to Harris Teeter. What are we going to do about it?
So what we are going to do is again, tomorrow we will handle language, excuse me, that adds to our existing emergency order, which in fact will give Harris Teeter the ability to, or I should say, it will make it a requirement that Harris Teeter has the ability to instruct and allow only one member of a family
Mhm.
into the store at one time, and to enforce that. And then in addition, we'll have the ability, if necessary, with either our officers or code compliance to enforce that if they have problems or issues. Does that answer your question, Boss?
Yes, thank you.
Second issue that has arisen is with the short-term rentals. And I'll give a brief summary, but then I'll ask Stephanie to add in. Since we took action last week, and particularly since Thursday, Friday, when we put in place our changes that it further extended the prohibition on taking bookings and advertising rentals out through May 15th, and also in not allowing new bookings to arrive or new check-ins on the island. A lot of work was done, working very closely, and we really have to give great kudos to Kika, Tony Elder, the whole gate crew there. They've worked really closely with us over the last week to work through modifications and changes in the entire pass system so that we can ensure that we had some control over blocking persons who were not supposed to come on the island from coming on the island. Having said that, over the weekend, we have found that there are still large numbers of property owners who have rentals who are still out there violating our ordinance in two ways. They are advertising their properties for rent and have not taken them off of their sites or blocked them out in any way. We also, in some cases in testing it, have found that it's not just a matter of not blocking it, but they have a complete willingness to rent to the point that some of them made arrangements in how they might even meet in order to make sure that we handle the transaction in some manner. And we're seeing way too many of these. Most of them are BBRO and Airbnb, which are particularly troublesome because we have no ability on those sites to know who the individuals are. They generally don't list the name of the owner. They don't list the property address. It's a little bit like playing detective. But we are identifying a number. I think that Stephanie said we had about 50 or so just over the weekend, about 50 tickets that we were preparing to write. So we're working to try to resolve that problem. But there are a couple things that have come up that I want to raise with the council and see whether there is what the council's view is and whether they see it as a problem or not a problem. The first one has to do with long-term rentals. Our action dealt with short-term rentals, which are defined in our ordinances as a home that is out for lease for a period of 28 days or less. We did not address long-term rentals. But we are finding that all of a sudden we have a lot of long-term rentals that are being booked, or I should say more than we normally have seen. So we do have people out there who are booking long-term rentals for the period of time between that would start occupancy between now and May. And our current action doesn't do anything to stop that. I think the concern raised is that the whole purpose of the restrictions on short-term rentals wasn't that we were trying to take action against short-term rentals. What we were trying to do was respond to the concerns of our citizens, that they wanted to see a reduction in the number of people coming onto this island from other locations who might be exposed to and might be raising the risk of bringing this virus to the island, and that can happen with somebody who is rented for 32 days just as well as somebody who is rented for 30. So so the concern was, even though we didn't address the long-term rentals, do we feel that that is something we are comfortable with? And if not, do we feel that we should take some action to encompass that into our earlier action? And one of the additional part of this is that one thing we just don't know. I will assume that some of them are absolutely legit in that somebody has reserved and intends to be here 30 days. But it is also interesting how many just sort of came up overnight with 30, 31, 32-day rentals. And we have no idea whether the intent is really a 30-day rental or not, or whether this is a a way around the short-term rental. Stephanie, do you have anything to add in terms of what we're finding with regard to that group? I think the numbers are what do we have, about 30 of them since?
Yes. So, yeah, so as Craig said, what we're seeing a lot of is when the first order was put in place, we had a number of people that all of a sudden popped up with 31, 32, 33 term contracts. And so then that fell out of our short-term rental ordinance, which is 30 days or less. Okay, so now what we're seeing a lot of is that with the second order that went in place, what we're seeing a lot of, and the way that this is working is Jan Fox, who is our short-term rental compliance clerk, is doing a great job. She's working with Kim Walker at KICA. And the process is that KICA has suspended they have temporarily suspended the ability for property management companies to send the link out to allow guests to print their own pass. So right now, everything, with the exception of property owners, are still able to call them a pass. But everything right now, if you need a pass, a guest pass, you go through KICA. KICA then is funneling it to us. We're also getting copies of the actual, when they actually made the reservation and for how long. That's how we're getting the information. We know that we're also seeing that where we may have had people who based on our first emergency order that stated that no new reservations that went from March 25th through April 15th. We're seeing people who may have made reservations on April 25th, but they somehow, they basically got onto the island and now they're here. And so what they're doing now is saying, we want to stay another week or two. Can we extend the contract? Or people who may have come, on March 28th, but they're now here and they're wanting to extend the contract. So what we're doing with KICA is what we're saying is that, okay, we're getting a copy of the contract. We're finding out when the original reservation was made. If it was made within those days that were, if it was made when they should not have made the reservations, we've been denying them. But of course, we're having all of these different scenarios play out that we're trying to manage, and it is really becoming a full-time night and day process of trying to manage between owners trying to call in passes and then trying to manage the extensions and then these long-term rentals that we have.
And we do have, I'm getting a couple on my iPad, people writing questions. One of them, just as background for this question, how many rentals do we have on the island? The number we throw around right now, we have about 1,350 licensed short-term rentals. Although in this exercise, we're finding, again, a lot more that aren't, despite all our efforts, a lot more that aren't licensed. So I think there's two separate issues here. The first one really is this issue of long-term rentals. We did not address that. And are we okay with it? Or do we, even though we're seeing we're seeing more of these being booked right now than we expected. Are we okay with that? Or do we think that is contrary to what we were trying to accomplish and what we think the residents wanted us to accomplish when we stopped the influx from short-term rentals? And do we think we need to take any similar action to those new rentals that are over 28 days?
So I think my thought on that is we had the idea behind stopping the rentals was to not allow new people to come onto the island that are not owners. In my mind, it's immaterial whether they're short-term renters or long-term renters. I think it's immaterial whether the new long-term rentals are legit or whether they are a circumvention of our short-term rental ordinance. I think there is real evidence, not just here, but in other towns from what I've read, that people are pulling that stunt using long-term rentals. But even if it were not the case, they're rentals. I think we erred in restricting only short-term renters. That was just a mistake. I think we should correct it and renters, period, as of today.
I agree with Klaus, and I find it really disappointing that people are not adhering to the spirit of the requirements, and many are using, it appears, the 30-day rental to circumvent the short-term rental moratorium. Some people have emailed me and they'd like to know what the punishment is. What's the penalty? The tickets that we gave out, what is the penalty for that?
And we'll get to it's one of the issues, if I can hold that question.
No problem.
One of the items that I want to talk about is where we are in terms of enforcement, what the penalties are, and
Okay.
we'll talk about the direction we're going. Okay.
Certainly wait. Thank you.
Craig, this is Chris. I assume anyone else who's listening online today is angry when they listen to this. I am. It just pisses me off.
I know.
The violations that we're writing, the 57 tickets, do they become a matter of public record in terms of once they go to court?
Good question.
I'm looking at our attorney.
Well, if they go to court, it's certainly public record.
Okay, so those names, the people who are certainly violating the spirit of the intent of the law, those names at some point will be made public. Is that correct?
Yes, I think they're subject to FOIA as well.
And those names will also, the addresses be made public?
Well, that gets into the question of whether it's personal information. We typically are going to redact addresses.
Okay. The best
For
disinfectant
FOIA request.
Okay, but the best disinfectant is sentiment, because this is really obscene. We've got a community that's made its viewpoint very clear, and yet we've got, it sounds to me like 57 people, maybe more, maybe a few less, but who are willing to put their neighbors and friends at risk.
Health.
Chris, sorry, I mean, I believe from what I understood Jan to be saying, we've issued 57 notices now. They're still working. So that number is going up. Someone sent me an email, I'm sure you also got it, that they went on Airbnb and found a whole bunch more. Now, there may be duplications in there, but I suspect we're going to find more. As you know, or as the mayor knows, certainly, I personally, yesterday evening, just for a lark, pretended to be a renter of 2 of these properties, communicated with the owner and was actually told that it was a little tricky. The resort wasn't really allowing new ones, but they could meet personally with me to hand me a key. So it's really, really despicable.
Let me just so I can. I don't want anybody to misunderstand, Klaus, from the way you described that. This person was not acting on behalf of or in any way representing the resort in the action they took with you.
Correct. Sorry, I should have been. She was doing that for herself.
I didn't want people going out there thinking the resort was doing that. No.
Sorry, my bad. I should have made that clear. No, it was this particular person who was using a fair degree of what I would describe as criminal energy, and was perfectly willing to share that with me.
In the ordinance that we passed last week, the emergency ordinance, did we not provide for enhanced penalties to include revocation of license if they were violating that emergency order? Am I recalling that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
We talked about the 1, 2, 3 strike, you're out.
Yeah, but I think we actually said that in violation of the emergency order was a 1 strike and you're out option. Is that
Okay?
Joe
That is
shaking his head
correct.
yes. I assume that's
That is correct.
I would support anything that we can do to accomplish what our intent was last week. And if that means that the long-term renters are now in violation of that same order, I would support that with one loophole. And that is there's got to be some legitimacy to a few of these, either by the date they were entered into or something. You can't, I don't think you can make a blanket because there has to be some logic. On the other hand, my guess is the majority of them are false. Or fraudulent.
I support Chris, and this is a health issue. This is a health issue that people are dying from. And to take it arbitrarily and, as a lark is really not funny.
No. And we've got people paying attention, and I haven't heard
Right.
any names given, but certainly if it's VRBO and Airbnb, I think it's probably not, at least as a grouping, the four major property managers that we rely on and we trust. If there are, then we'll certainly go after whoever. But VRBO and Airbnb is frankly a little under my skin because they're not interested in playing by the rules. And they're certainly not interested in what's in Kiowa's best interest.
Mr. Mayor, this is Dan. I think Chris makes some good points. I think maybe a suggestion on how to handle this is we consider putting long-term rentals under the same restrictions in terms of their start date. However, give an applicant the ability to seek an exception to this, whereas they could submit to the town a copy of the lease, the term, like let's say somebody legitimately wanted to rent their house out for the next year. And they had someone who's interested in doing that. I'm all in favor of them doing it. I don't want to hold them up from doing that. That'd be great. And if it starts in July, I'd say, well, if it's for a year, but we want to see who the terms of the party are. We want to talk to both the renter and the owner, and we want to know what the financial terms are, because it's for a year. It better not be for $1,200. There's a way to do this, but I do think you have to give legitimate renters and legitimate owners a chance for an opt-out by giving us the kind of information that would support their request. Then I'm fine. Then I'd say sweep
I agree, under penalty of perjury. I agree, but under penalty of perjury, if they lied to us, there's got to be something more than, ooh, we got fooled.
I'm with you.
Speaking of penalty, Mr. Mayor, I guess I didn't catch that. We are still separately addressing the whole issue of penalties for those caught renting, correct?
We're going to get to, I still want to hold off the penalty discussion. I'd like
Right.
to solve the issues first of this question of how do we feel about long-term rentals. So what I'm going to try to do is summarize what I just thought I heard, which is that there's a recognition still that there may be some legitimate long-term rentals. And there are a person who's building a house here and, they need to do a 9-month rental while they're doing the building, and they're not coming here to subterfuge the rentals, not to subterfuge the COVID problem.
Right.
But what I'm also hearing is that to the extent that we have people who are doing 30, 32-day, 35-day rentals, which gets them out of the short-term rental piece, that is, I'm hearing that if we can find the appropriate language to do that, that is it was never intended that we should be during this period of time encouraging or allowing people to come under that basis, because we're trying, for these next days, to May 15th. So I'm hearing that the council members would entertain, if Stephanie and Joe can create the proper language, would want to entertain in addition to our order that essentially brought long-term rentals under the same general constraints as short-term rentals.
Yes.
I said too many words, but is that the thrust of what I'm hearing?
I think
Yes.
so.
And I'm a little concerned about the definition of legitimate here and making sure the town staff understands exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't sound like the council wants to limit. I mean, My first thought was you're just talking about leases that might have been entered a month or two ago. But you're just, I guess, I think staff needs some guidance on what council thinks of as a legitimate long-term lease.
I'm not sure, Dan, I mean, maybe I misunderstood Dan, but aren't we saying legitimate or not, for the period until May 15th, there will be no new renters, period.
Mhm.
Short-term or long-term, legitimate or illegitimate. I thought that's what we had said. After that, I think Dan mentioned a June date. Who knows what's in June? But I mean, I do believe that we, you know, the period till May 15th, we've said it's closed, it should be closed.
I think you're on thin ice.
Uh,
I think you know, and I agree with the spirit of what we're trying to do, but you may have someone who is doing exactly what the mayor said, building a house, and they may be arriving here on the first.
I think there ought to be a way to grant an exception to a legitimate case. Now,
You,
I think I can't define legitimate other than that we need to see the lease itself and the terms of the lease and hear from both parties. And council, if there's a way we could do that and say, all right, here's a legitimate lease. The guy's building a house. It's for 9 months. He's paying a market rate for each of the months for 9 months. And if he breaks the lease, it's going to cost him $10,000. I'd say, fine, we'll grant you an exception to the rule.
How about if I could throw out just another alternative? You know, one of the actions that the governor took a couple days ago was to eliminate any new bookings of any rental, and he didn't differentiate between short-term and long-term. He said anything 90 days or less in duration that came from that was rented to anybody from the 4 hotspot locations. What if you simply tied to that same 90-day period and said that we're essentially extending our prohibition not only to rentals that are short-term rentals defined as 28 days, but for any contract that that is for a duration of less than 90 days.
Will we get a series of 91-day leases?
So the question we might, but I was going to suggest that 90, the only thing that I would ask is that, no, that's fine, because we're going to keep the date May 15th. So this would only impact anything new, if anyone tries to do a new, and then, you know, new reservation or booking that would take place between obviously now and May 15th. If it's 90 days or less, we will say no. Is that what I'm potentially hearing? That Joe and I can work up something that's centered on that.
well, I think they're talking about a check-in.
Well, I know, I'm saying check-in, based on our ordinance 2, we say new reservation or check-in. So I'm asking if they want to do both new reservation and check-in.
Drew?
I think you got that one or a handful of cases that might be legit. Dan and I think have the same thought on that. I'd like to lock it down, but I would just hate to be the one guy who's got a legitimate contract that goes into effect in 2 days and he can't get on the island.
I would like to let you guys know that in regards to legitimate, because we're working so closely with Kika, we know if there's a homeowner who basically is building a house, and we have already said okay on those. So because we are working hand in hand with Kika, as far as I know, we have not prohibited anyone who is legitimate to not allow them to be on the island. So I don't think that would be a problem because we are working with Kika.
Okay, so you can work around the question of legitimacy.
Yes.
Okay, then I'm fine.
All right, so Stephanie and Joe will work on some language. And again, I think the rationale here is twofold. One is that these long-term rentals beyond the 28 days are in effect causing what we were trying to eliminate, which was bringing additional people onto the island from that were not family members, were not property owners, that were essentially visitors, tourists that we are, I think our people are concerned they would rather not be bringing that additional risk, and that we flat out have an enforcement issue because we just have no way to know on these how many of them are really 32-day rentals and how many of them are rentals where it's a 32-day contract, but the person isn't intending to stay past 2 weeks, and there's a wink and a nod, and we are not the only one dealing with that. I've had the mayor of one other community who's fighting that issue right now significantly, where some of their entities are writing long-term rentals where it's clear that there's never any intent. Both the pricing in the contract and the intent was never to stay 30 days. The second issue related to this we have has to do with extensions of existing rentals. And so I don't know that we're recommending any change, but it was one of these things where we sort of stepped into it thinking it was a little deal. We had initially a couple, after we issued our ordinance or our change last week, a couple situations where property management companies or renters called and said, hey, boy, I've been here for 3 weeks. We really aren't ready. We don't want to go back to, wherever, New York, Ohio, whatever. We'd like to extend our contract for 2 more weeks. Would that be okay? And I think our sort of gut reaction, trying to be sympathetic to the family and trying to recognize that, well, in this case, the person was already here. This wasn't a matter of keeping the potential exposure out. Our immediate reaction to that was, oh, okay. Then that turned into the next issue which was, okay, well, but the property that I'm in isn't going to be available next week because the owner's coming. So now could the rental company move me to a different property? And again, these started off as 1 or 2s, but Stephanie, we're now up to about how many?
The numbers are just growing. It could be probably, I don't know, 40 or 30 or so. It's just growing.
So something that starts off with like, okay, that makes sense. Has now become this, extensive, continued effort to extend rentals. And then it builds the same issue you have of, okay, which ones are legitimate? The person really, and I understand somebody, I've been here 2 weeks. I don't want to go back to New York. But then we have the issue of the rentals asking for the extension, but in fact, they aren't really extending. There's a new family coming in to take over that rental. So this is one I think we're looking for, and I do know that some other communities have dealt with this. I do think I saw, Joe, you may know, I don't think it was Folly that you deal with, but I saw one where they did put a clear 0 extensions to any rental contracts at all. At this point, I don't have an opinion. We will be driven by the will of the council here. So I'm interested in what your thoughts are on this one. And essentially our options are just, we're knee deep into this practice, is to continue to live with it and try to monitor it as best we can. Or it's to say, you know what, when it was 3 or 4, it was fine, but if this is going to be 40, 50, 60, it's just too much, not what we were intending, and to go ahead and try to close those exceptions down as well.
I'd be really careful with that, because I happen to know 2 cases where people have been here for months already and want to extend. And the reason they're extending in the one case is their family has told them, don't come back here because the risks are very high with the virus. And the other case is similar, but they're in a different position. They're staying because they don't want to go back to New York. And so they've extended for 2 or 3 more weeks. And in neither case do I find they're manipulating anything by doing that. And what happened to the one case is yesterday they came through the gate, and I guess people know them because they're in and out. They've been here since January. They did get a new pass though issued to them. They did ask, you're from New York, when did you get here? And also, have you done the isolation if that was appropriate?
Okay. Stephanie, you were starting to add in some
I'm
comment?
sorry.
No, that's all right, Marianne. I was just wanting to let you all know in your discussion that to date, we have 58 extensions.
And I, as an idea, to me, I mean, I don't know why, but it feels different to me. It feels qualitatively different to have a person, a couple, or a family that is at, XYZ Flyway or Bufflehead or, wherever, and wants to extend this same terms, just move it out, stay in the same location and do all that. That feels different from saying, yeah, but the owner wants this, so why don't we find a different place? Could we say, or would it even make sense to say, you may extend your contract with no change of terms whatsoever, i.e., other than price? I have no view on price, but you cannot move or do anything like that. You have to stay in the same location. If that same location is not available, you're going home. If you want to move, your ability to stay here ends with the expiration of your contract. Would that make sense, or does that not strike people as sensible?
Klaus, this is Dan. That's where my head would be. If you think this way, we're trying to limit the number of new people on the island who are renters, not owners and not owner-occupied residents, renters. And we say to people, we understand your reason for wanting to not, say, go back to an area that is prone to the disease. If you can stay in your same property and work to extend the lease, that's fine. If you have to move or anything else changes, no, you must leave. Don't extend. In other words, you can't release a different piece of property. That way, in effect, the population is not growing. If I allow you to move to a new property, somebody else is going to move into your property. You got a new rental. I'm not in favor.
Chris, any comments, Chris?
Yeah, Stephanie, you might be able to answer the question. Of the 40 or 50 that fall into the extension category, how many fall into what was just described, which is logical in my mind, but how many fall outside of what was just described?
Oh, I'm just going to take a wild guess at this and probably say maybe about half. And what we've done is that exactly what Klaus and I think Dan and Marianne is that what we encourage and what I've encouraged is that if they stay in the same property, but they want to extend, then I'm not defining that as a new reservation or new check-in. But if they state they have to move to a different property, then I'm telling them I'm defining that as a new check-in, and therefore they will be in violation of our emergency order.
Okay.
Right.
I'm comfortable with what was described by Dan and Klaus.
All right. Then what I will ask is that as Stephanie and Joe look at what other changes we've already talked about to consider tomorrow, they take that feedback and also incorporate that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The last issue, and then we'll move on to the budget, because I know that's what everybody really wants to hear. The question has come up of penalties. I think this is really just to clarify for everybody. So what happens as we are finding people in violation? What are the penalties? What is the approach? I'm sitting here with my iPad, getting questions here from people actually as we're talking, and that is one that's coming across is what happens when you do find somebody. And I'm going to ask Joe to, some combination of Stephanie and Joe to address this. But I do want to make clear that right now we're taking a very aggressive stance. I say aggressive, being what we're doing is we're writing tickets as we find violations, and it is clear that it is a violation. We're not whispering in people's ears and saying, geez, we wish you didn't do that and don't do it again. But we felt in this situation we needed to make a statement. I do want to make, there is a proposal that I would like to make in a moment with regard to what happens with the fines and penalties that we're collecting. I'll hold off on that a minute. But one of the issues that I know all of you have asked either Stephanie or me in the last day is, well, what's our choice to fine versus when can somebody actually have their license suspended? And so I would like maybe them to address that and make sure everybody's sort of clear on how that works.
I guess if I can go first, it's actually, I think, relatively speaking, a minor issue, but there is a revision I wanted to make to the section 6 of our ordinance to clarify that the only violations that will be charged by the town will be limited to civil fines and not include criminal actions except under the state code. That's just based on some of the statements the Attorney General has made and some of my research. As it's currently structured, we can assess someone with the typical $500 and imprisonment. So I'm just going to take out that imprisonment under Kiowa's code, add language making clear that the fine is civil, and we're talking about infractions, civil infractions, but then also adding language that people are still subject to civil and criminal penalties under state law and under the governor's orders. So that's kind of just almost just a bookkeeping matter, both currently and after my proposed change. We will still have the ability to suspend or revoke a rental business license. And that's in there now, and it will be in there. That's a civil action, it's not criminal. So that's fine with me from a legal standpoint.
And Joe, if you can elaborate on through our current municipal code, we have the ability to suspend or revoke a license. We can do that today, but they will still be able to operate until they according to our current ordinance, it states that they have the ability to appeal. They have to appeal that to council. Are they still operated until council hears that appeal, if they decide to appeal?
I'm looking at it. What I will say is we can make it where it comes into immediate effect in the emergency ordinance, if that is what council wants to do.
Okay, that's why I just want a clarification. If we wanted to do that, we would have to put that in our emergency order.
Craig has heard this from me probably a lot more often than he wants to hear this. So I promise this is the last time I'm saying this, okay? I think certainly for some of the behavior we've seen out there, immediate loss of license is the only appropriate sanction. Now, I don't know whether we can legally make a distinction between what I just called some of the behavior and not others, whether some is more innocent than others and some should only get fined or not. I leave that to the lawyers, but I think we should be for some, for those as a minimum that we have found to not only be offering, but actively pushing a rental, I think the only appropriate sanction, I say it again, is loss of license immediately.
plus the fine.
Obviously.
This is Dan, isn't our municipal court the court in which would hear these cases? And
No.
if so, doesn't the judge set the fine, not us? Unless I want to plead guilty, and then I don't know what the answer. If I plead guilty, do I just get charged $500?
The revocation or suspension of a license under the current code is done by the license inspector in the first instance. And there's an appeal available to town council.
Okay,
So that does not involve
the judge.
the judge. Now, if you throw the fine in, that would perhaps involve the judge. So, that can be addressed, but
Don't care about the fine so much as the loss of license. I think that
exactly.
is a significant sanction, and I think it is
Well-
that will change behavior once it's been made public, not whose license we took, but that we took license. I think that will really get people thinking.
I agree, Klaus, except for I think you're still going to have the few, as we have learned, who are Airbnb clients, for example, who've decided, okay, you're going to take my license away. I'm going to continue to rent. And if that happens, I want the ability to fine them today, tomorrow, and the next day, $500 each time. Can I do that, council?
Yes.
Yes. And also, Dan, just for the for Airbnb and VRBO and HomeAways and other, generally what we're finding is that they don't have a license. So there's nothing for us to take away in that instance, but we do have the ability to fine them for each violation plus every day. So in this case, we're typically finding 2 or 3 violations that we can fine them for each violation and then every day.
Okay, good. Because that is what we should be doing.
Question to Stephanie or Joe, for those people who don't have a license. So first of all, they're in contravention of all sorts of rules anyway, right? Sorry, one second. That's a garbage call. They're in violation of rules already. Now they're in worse violations because they are renting without a license and they're doing it now. Can we make it so legally that they will not be eligible to apply for a license for X years in the future?
Yeah. I don't see a
The
legal
current
reason why
the
you
current
can't.
ordinance says 1 year.
Right. It did say 1 year. You can apply again in a year, which is fine, actually.
And I apologize, Joe, I cut you off, but that is what the current ordinance reads.
Yeah. And just, let me correct what I said before about the assessments, the penalties. They actually follow the same path as the license. So the license official assesses the penalty and the appeal goes to town council. So that's completely removed from the municipal court.
Oh, okay. So that, Joe, is the $500 and the loss of license. It all just is, your only appeal is to go to council?
Correct.
For a loss of license.
Well, to be clear, I mean, you go to council and then if they really want to fight it out, there are provisions to
Right.
go to the circuit court, appeal to county court,
Right.
which isn't open right now.
I mean, my bias on this is, and look, I am as bothered by the behavior we're seeing here as anyone. But our penalties are not insubstantial, and the fact that we can fine somebody each day if they continue. So, I do have the sense that that if we are being vigilant on fines, we're going to get people's attention with the fines. And so I do have a concern about jumping out and just on day one, pulling licenses all over the place, just because I'm concerned that we are going to spend a lot of time over the next months then back relitigating, and I don't mean that in a legal term, whether that suspension or pulling of that license was right or not right, or an overkill or not overkill. And I guess from my own perspective, I kind of prefer to leave the suspension of a license to those cases that we are going to see where they really are multiple continuing, that they've been fined a couple times, so they've got 4 properties and they're, I do have some reluctance to just all of a sudden take the license suspension, which is as close as we have to capital punishment under this, and be, jumping out with that on day one. And that in no way implies that I don't think this is serious. I know our penalties are big. And when I look at what Jan is doing, in many cases, these people have got 2 or 3 violations at the same time. So, in some cases, they're getting a fine for not having a license plus a fine for taking a booking. So I think it's important that the message to our staff be that the loss or suspension of a license is in fact in their toolbox as something they ought to use. But I personally, I have a preference that they start working this with the fines as much as they can. Because I mean, again, we're not giving $100 fines. These will get people's attention.
Right.
But that's my bias.
I think that's wise, Greg. I think that's very wise.
Although I think Klaus made a point earlier, and if we've got people actively trying to sneak around and say, I'll give you a key on the lowdown, I think those guys should, I think that's a different issue.
And I don't disagree with you, Chris. I just don't disagree.
I'll be the unwise then. I hear Craig. I also think that there's a need for punishment for really bad behavior, and there's a need for real deterrence. And I wouldn't go, I don't think that I'm advocating pulling everyone's license willy-nilly, as you suggested. But I think we can go through this, and there will be some, I can think of 2 or 3 right now. Someone offered me just last night that it was absolutely available for check-in in 2 days, no problem whatsoever. And did I want to tour? And I have no issue whatsoever. Quite on the contrary, I think we are weak if we don't. I'll just say it that way.
I'd like to say something. We're under an emergency order. We're under an emergency order for the state, and we're under an emergency order in Kiowa. We're trying to protect the health and well-being of the people that are here. By violating these requirements, people are saying it's not important if you come from a state where there's a lot of COVID-19. And it's okay if I don't follow the rules. I think it's a very serious violation, and one that requires very serious penalty.
And I think I think you're hearing we agree. I think it's well said. Well said. All right, then I think Joe and Stephanie will pull some things together, and I anticipate that we'll want to call tomorrow for a vote on some specific extensions in additions to our order. I do have one thing. I said I get to this question of penalties, and I don't know, Joe, whether I can just do this on my own authority or not, or whether the council needs to agree with it. But what I would propose, and I bounced this individually off a couple of people, but I've not talked to the whole council. What I would like to do is during the period of this crisis, where we are in fact enforcing and penalizing with fines short-term rentals, or if we make that change, long-term rentals, what I'd like to recommend is that we earmark all of the net fines that the town collects. And by net, that means, as I think you all know, there is a portion of all of our fines that includes a piece that the state collects that we have no impact over. And then there's also a piece of this that goes to a victims fund that we don't impact. But the remainder of the fine that we collect, that we would essentially earmark those and pledge that at the end of this crisis, we would donate, the town would donate that sum, whatever it is, to some legitimate nonprofit established charity that exists and is being created, and there have been a few already created that have been put together to benefit tourism workers that have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 virus. And my point here is simply that I think we've taken a stance that we want to aggressively enforce. I am not interested in hearing people in that will start going on about, oh, the town is just using this as a revenue tool and we're filling our coffers on the backs of short-term rentals. And the fact is, there are a lot of people who are going to be greatly in need as a result of this. So I would propose that that we take that action, that whatever we collect in the way of revenues, we agree that the town will not include that in its revenues. We'll aggregate it, and we will donate that, donate the sum of those proceeds when this thing is all over. I would be interested if there are any comments to that, and I would ask Stephanie and Joe whether that is something I have the authority to do, or is that something the council needs to concur with.
Craig, can we, you know that town council has the authority to do that, but can Joe and I, after the meeting, sit down and determine if that has to be in an executive order, or can you just do it in the proclamation? All
right. But let me just ask the question: Is there anybody who is potentially? Can I ask this question without a vote? Can I assume that the council probably shares that desire to see it done that way?
I support it.
Yes.
Joe, am I allowed to ask that question, or do I need to wait and have a vote on that?
I think it would be better to do this with the executive order changes that we're talking about.
Okay.
Honestly, because that is one limitation to some of, I mean, that.
Okay. I will be asking separate part. I will be asking Stephanie and Joe to add that in, something to that effect, into whatever we pull together for tomorrow. So I'm giving you a heads up on that.
One comment, if I could. I like the idea of having this net revenue be available for charitable purposes. My only concern about saying relative to tourism is you may find at the end of all of this, there are other people, and I'm thinking about the frontline healthcare workers.
Yeah, I agree.
So maybe let's make it charitable, but let's not define what that is until we're done. We'll have a better perspective then.
I'm fine with that. And when I was thinking of charitable, I know that, you know, for all of the different hotel, restaurant workers in the Charleston area, that there have been a number of nonprofits that have been established to help them or their families. So that was the group I was thinking about. But yeah, we can figure out later. The point being that the town doesn't intend to keep those monies. We'll use them for a proper cause.
Great.
Very good.
Any other comment, or we'll move on to the budget?
Well, let's do the budget. That's got to be the best
Yeah,
part of the day.
no controversies.
All right, Dorota is going to do a quick overview.
Yes, Dorota, if you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I just unmuted.
Put the video on.
Okay. All right. So today we're gonna look at the expenditures. We did last month. We look at the revenues. However, I did. Let me find the budget, which very quick. Sorry. How? Okay. No, I can't find this. All right. So So like I mentioned, last month we looked at revenues, but with all those changes in what's going on right now, I just want to give you a quick update. I did update the actual or projected expenditures, revenues for this year too. And what I have done is pretty much, I've taken what we've collected through March, and mostly on the accommodation taxes and hospitality taxes. So right now what you see, it's pretty much about 1.2 million less than what I was presenting last month. So another thing that I want to mention before we go to the budget is there's a couple of big variances to this year budget to what we're actually projecting, and this is mostly due to the Parkway project. We didn't have it in this year budget. We did had some money aside for this project, but we didn't know the timing of it. So you'll see this big difference of 1.9, which is a net of the construction of the pavement of the Parkway, offset by the grant that we are promised to receive from the county. So that's 1.9. There's a couple of more items. We have about 162,000 in the deputies cost, and this is all timing issue. I don't know if you recall, but last year when we look at the budget, we were under the budget in this line item. All the vehicles were actually purchased, and we were billed this year, and we had it in a last year budget. So that's a big item. Another one is in a consulting line. We didn't budget for the study that HRNA is conducting right now. So that's a big one. And also Denny's construction. We didn't have it in the budget for it. They overseeing the contract right now with for the pavement. The big thing here is still, because I updated the projections, revenue projections, you'll see like a big almost 600,000 positive variance in tourist costs, but it's mostly because of the state accommodation taxes. Like I mentioned, I only took 3 quarters, assuming that we're not gonna get any state accommodation in the 4th quarter. Therefore, our CVB remittance, which is 30% of that, is less than what it was budgeted. And we're also going to be short on the funding for the state accommodation applicants because we pretty much fund as what we get. We don't carry a balance in that account because you have 2 years to spend that money. So we're gonna have to fund less than what we budgeted.
So Dorota, what this says is that right now, I mean, this is substantial. We are looking on a cash flow basis.
Yes.
We're looking at a $3 million swing on a cash flow basis from what we budgeted. And once you take out a very substantial, the $2 million capital improvement.
This number. Mm-hmm.
Still sitting with a $1 million swing and a $1 million negative swing in our financial position.
That's correct.
And that is primarily driven by revenues.
From the, yeah, it's mostly restricted revenues. Like I said, accommodation taxes, hospitality. We still, this is on a cash basis, and I will present the financial statements at the next meeting. So you'll have, we can go detail for all the revenues, but like I said, this is with the assumption that the 4th quarter, we will not be collecting any money in accommodation and hospitality. Even though there will be probably just a little bit in hospitality, but that's it. And I just want to mention one more thing. That number, the total expenses doesn't include the cleanup cost.
Does not include.
Does not include. No. So there is additional 700, almost 800. Well, we may get something from FEMA probably or not, but anyhow, right now it's almost 800,000 in cleanup costs that it's not in that number.
Wait, I thought we were going to get most of that back from FEMA.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
Small amounts.
no,
No.
sir. But anyhow, I just want to very quickly show you something too, as we talk. So this line shows you our fund balances, which is pretty much like retained earnings or what we have in the bank. And this is the total of what we're projecting with those changes or adjustment to the income. So we still have a balance that we can work with before we go to the budget. So,
So
we
the
can start
bottom
with
line,
the,
we
yes, sir.
have the cash to cover it, but nonetheless, we're still, what this is saying is that this situation is financially really, this plus other weaknesses we had already seen in some other areas and like building permits and so on. This is in fact given us a pretty significant negative hit.
Exactly, and we actually have to borrow from our reserves to balance the budget.
Got it.
Which is, but the big thing also again is the parkway, that we do have money in the reserves that we were planning. So
That'll come out of the capital fund, will it not?
yes, that comes from the capital fund. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Also, to be fair, if reserves of any kind are to be used in any case at all, this is probably it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so now we can look at the budget or the budget's request that we proposing. So one of our biggest costs, of course, is personal cost or payroll, and we are the personal cost shows about 8% or 146,000 increase for what we have this year. And this budget assumes 5% or about 60,000 performance-based increase to the employees. The budget also is for 19 employees. Well, this year we had 18 and a half. We had 18 for 6 months, and then we hire code for about short-term clerk, yes,
Right.
for 6 months. The budget also has 15,000 for temporary help, which is 5,000 of it is for the project related to the new website, and 10,000 for a temporary help if needed. So it's just like a plug number. There is a South Carolina retirement system. Has a 1% increase in retirement effective July 1st. And also there is a 7% increase in the medical cost, insurance cost that is mandated by PIBA, and that starts on January 1st. There's also a few more items that we have this, for mayor's suggestion, we have this employee benefit group that was created by Stephanie, and Mr. Prickett was in this group, and Jim and myself. And we were asked to look at our current benefits and review them and compare it to others and see if we have any suggestions. So I'm just going to flip very quick to that sheet where we suggested some of the changes, and so okay, so first of all, 401k. The town actually currently offers a 401k plan. It's an optional for employees that are with the town for longer than a year. And right now the town pays 50% or up to 3,000 of the employee contribution. the current cost for the town with that is about $20,000 a year. And our work group is proposing a change to add, which is pretty much, it's offered by PIBA already, 457 plan. We just didn't have it in our employee handbook. So people will have a choice either or those. But to increase the town contribution from 50% to 100%, and also increase the contribution amount from 3,000 to 5,000. And it's hard to budget how people gonna react or if they're gonna change the contribution. But if, let's say, if everyone who is participating right now will double the contribution, there will be additional cost for about 19,000 for the town with that change. And those changes that I'm talking about, they already included in that budget proposal. So that's not on top of what we're using. The health insurance, the town is participating in the PBAS health insurance. As I mentioned, the premiums are going up about 7% on January 1st of 2021. And the current cost is for the town is $138,000. And the town also funds or subsidizes part of the employees' premiums, and that's another $26,000. So as per directions and discussion that the council had when we talk about the subsidy, we are proposing to change that to 20/80 employee-employer ratio. And that way the town's contribution will decrease of about 20,000. But because we feel that a lot of employees will feel that that change and that increase, it's about $1,000 on the net that they will get less annually. We're proposing like a one-time salary adjustment to offset that that increase, and that would be about $28,000 for the town cost, and it's only for the employees that are pretty much single. I mean, not single, but on a single plan, employee and spouse, and employee and child.
Dorota, that makes the 26,233 subsidy go away. Is that correct?
That's correct. There will be no subsidy. Yes, there will be no subsidy. It will be just the 28, whatever the premium is. 80% of it will be the town, and 20% of the total premium will be for the employee.
And then going forward, how do we have assurance that we don't slide back into the subsidy picture?
Well, Chris, we talked about this at length. The big goal here is to get everybody on an 80-20 split.
No one supports that more than I do. I've been fighting for that for 4 years.
And this way we do it by really reducing the obligation of the town a little bit and paying that to the employees one time. It's really up to subsequent councils not to let it slip away from 80-20, which the employees seem pretty comfortable with. At least our group felt comfortable with proposing this to them. So you're right. We could slide back into a worse situation. The issue would be, let's not do that. This is a good plan.
And Chris, you have the opportunity to spend 2 more years making sure you don't slide back.
Or even
Why do you hate me?
I was just going to comment, Chris, that yes, Dan is correct. So as you know, current council cannot bind future council. So yes, I don't anticipate it, but a future council could decide to make changes, or they may decide to go to 30-70 or go to 90-10, but yes.
Yeah, I knew the answer when I asked it, but I suppose I wanted to get you on record that you recognize that the theory or the vision of this council is to stay at the 20/80, in that we shouldn't, as a matter of public policy, backslide on that. That's my opinion.
Okay, so another
Point for anybody who may be listening and wondering what we're doing here, the situation is simply that in many municipalities today, unlike people who are, let's say, in the corporate world, a lot of employees are still receiving essentially close to fully paid medical insurance. And we have been trying for several years to go to an approach that looks more like a corporation where there's more of a cost sharing. In this case, an 80-20 sharing of costs. And in order to get us to that point, what we're trying to do is what one might call a sort of a one-time buyout, not a buyout, but a one-time monetary payment to offset the negative future amounts that they're going to be paying, on the idea that we kind of bite the bullet this first year. We move to this new approach, which is going to be in the future going to require employees to pay more for their insurance. But it's a way of getting us there. So,
yes, yeah, we want to follow the. We've heard that directions that would be the best approach to you know, get away of that subsidy, and but again, we also proposing that salary adjustment to those that will be affected. Another item that we discussed is the Christmas present or bonus. Historically, the town employees were given something around Christmas time, and it's usually a discussion that the Stephanie or prior town administrator, I guess, had with the council. So just to make it easier and for the employees to kind of budget that amount, in Christmas shopping, we're proposing that this amount will be the same as was this year, 300,000, or last year. 300.
$300.
Yes. We also included employee assistance program that is this minimal cost, but it gives an access to counseling services for employees. And also, this is a new policy that doesn't really, like at the moment, doesn't have a fiscal effect on the town, but we're proposing to add a maternity, paternity leave for employees that can care for a newborn, newly adopted child. So those are the main ones that do have some money assigned to it. We also talk about some other little items, but it's a matter of maybe like adding them to the policy, and once we have that ready, we'll talk about or present it to the council too. But those are the ones that are included in the budget and affecting the budget now. So let me just unshare this very quick, and I'll go back to the budget. So this is in regards to the town employees. We also have a funding for the deputies, the one that are off-duty deputies that are on our payroll. There is a small positive variance in that cost, but it's related mostly to the fact that they actually, I looked at all the months, and they not 100% of coverage, but like closer to 80% of coverage. So I reduced the number to actual coverage. We also have a big positive variance in the contract with the deputies with Charleston County. And this is mostly related to the fact that all the capital expenditures, vehicles, and equipment with it were purchased this year. So for the 2021, we only budgeting for pretty much payroll and recurring operating cost. The short-term rental code enforcement, or the after-hour enforcement, we didn't budget anything last year, but those are funded from application fees, or the application fees pretty much cover the cost for that contract. Utilities and supplies, they show as a small increase or an increase of about 90% of 45,000. And utilities show about 20% increase. And this is mostly due to the increase in irrigation cost for the new landscaping on the parkway. The general supplies show a small decrease, and the minor assets show an increase of 28,000. And it's mostly related to that deer removal equipment that Jim presented a few hours ago, almost a few hours. And we're requesting 3 new computers to replace 3 computers and the upgrades for all the existing ones. The advertising cost, that there is no, or a small decrease of $500. Communication cost, this is cell phones and landline, and we're showing about $6,000 increase, and this is related to the new provider that the council just approved a new contract a couple of months ago, I think in December. The waste management shows an increase of about 31,000, and it relates to a 2% CPI, let's say CPI increase. It's a placeholder, and I think we've discussed that increase a couple of, or the council was presented to the council, the proposal, and it was based on improvement in performance. Still, the discussions have been, I know they've been taking place with them, and so they haven't really officially gotten anything as far as the to us is on the paper that they want the increase, but we are putting in the budget. The insurance cost shows an increase of 32,000, and it's based on the increasing rates from the insurance reserve fund. The professional services, it's a small decrease of about 14,000, and includes the fee for the town attorney and some contract with Joe, plus reimbursable expenses and some miscellaneous items or consulting, and $25,000 for the audit. The consultant cost has decreased about 363,000, but that's mainly because of the contract with HRNA. This engagement will be completed almost the full engagement this year. We only put 5,000 for next year for like reimbursable expenses or travel for them. 10,000 is for the tallow tree, and 10,000 for the deer removal processing. We have a request of 100,000 for the website design. It's a new request, and it's something that came from the council retreat that the council felt that it's a good direction to look into redesigning the website. The 5,000 for stenographers, 9,000 for document management, and 50,000 is for the miscellaneous engineering. So it's just like a plug number or placeholder. The maintenance cost shows about 448,000 increase, and it consists of the following items. The software maintenance, it shows almost the same as last year. Building and vehicle maintenance shows 120,000% or 67,000 increase, and it's mostly related to a request for 25,000 to repair the area by the garage at the workstation. And this area doesn't drain and causes the water to leak into the garage. And we also, our custodial contract is up for bid, and we put a little more money, about 30,000 more to what we're paying right now, as that needs to be improved, the quality of their services. The island maintenance shows about $380,000 increase, but it's mostly because of the plug number. It's to $85,000 for unknown for the roads and bridges. Even though the parkway is being done now, but we don't know if there will be anything coming after or some extra money requests.
Does Brian have any things in mind for that 285, or is he just putting
No.
a placeholder in?
No, there is nothing specific.
It's
So
an awful big placeholder for given the two of our biggest road sections will have been done in the last 3 years.
that's correct, but the bridge also, so, I mean, we can put, I mean, we can change that. This is a placeholder. There's nothing specific there.
Okay.
Travel and training shows a little increase of 7,000. The rental cost, which is cost for the copiers and postage, there is no change there. Tourism and recreation, well, that I need to revise because we need to look at those numbers. This is all based on what we're collecting on the restricted revenues, pretty much. So once we have better projections of what we're gonna collect in state accommodation taxes or accommodation taxes, we can revise those numbers. But for now, with the assumptions that everything goes back to normal starting July 1st, those are the, I don't know if you're able to see the request, but maybe I will share them very quick with you. Let me, so this is the tourism and recreation request, again, with the assumption that we are operating as before July 1st. So arts and cultural fund is 297,000. Promotional fund, which is CVB, is 490. I think everyone is getting the emergency alert too. State accommodation tax applicants, it's 618, and that does not include the funding for deputies. I assume that we're gonna get the same level of funding as we did this last year or in this fiscal year. The beach patrol, 320, beach monitoring, 50,000, wildlife, 88,000, and conservancy, 70,000. And again, those are all assumptions. Now the other cost, it shows pretty much just 2% increase, and that includes the banking fees, community activities and outreach, due subscription and miscellaneous and contingency of 50,000 as we have this year. We also asking for replacement of 3 new vehicles, which is $95,000, and we put 771,000 for the parkway landscaping, and this is the number that was given by the landscaping company. So I know you were asked them to revisit that, but this is what they provided us with.
Rhoda, you know I'm going to raise my voice in objection to the vehicles.
Me too.
Two of those vehicles have less than 30,000 miles on them.
Yeah,
I know they're older, but I'm going to continue to object to that. I just don't see why we're trading in vehicles with 30,000 miles on them.
I agree with Chris. And what I'd like to ask is that we be provided with a list of all the vehicles that the town owns,
yes,
the
ma'am,
mileage on them, and the plans for them.
There.
Yes, ma'am. So very quickly, what I'm sharing right now is our inventory, and so what we asking, and we asking that because of the age more as a mileage that we have our vehicles on the 5-year depreciation schedule. So we asking to have the 4Runner replaced, and those two Tacomas.
Okay, well, the last time I had a question about vehicles, I neglected to ask for any other information, so I'm making that up now by asking for a list of all the vehicles, the mileage, or the place they are in the lease agreement, and the plans for those vehicles, what they're used for.
Okay, so I'll let Dorota answer, but we don't lease our vehicles, we purchase them. And
Okay,
on the sheet here, it gives you the department, so that tells you what the vehicles will be, the purpose of the vehicles. So building department, when it says that is Bruce department, and so that would be our building inspectors, our building official, and that is it. So we have Bruce, Leo, and Brian that will use those vehicles.
Can we have, Stephanie, I appreciate it, but could we just get a list? Like
You want besides what we're showing you now on the screen?
Yes, I want a list of all the vehicle the town owns.
That is the list.
Mileage on them, and
That
the
is-
plans for them.
Do you see the list on the screen that Dorota's sharing?
Yeah,
Okay,
So that's the list.
so
I
this
can
is all of our vehicles?
Yeah, those
Yes,
are all our
ma'am.
vehicles.
Okay, that will suffice, and I'll put
I
that
can
up.
email it to you too, just after that too. Okay.
And if I can just add one more other thing, Dorota, and I know, Chris, we discussed this, is that part of the 3 vehicles that she shared, and the reason why, we try to put together a policy with regards to how often we replace our vehicles. Some of this is because also, obviously, we get a better resale, but at some point, some of the vehicles, even though they may have low mileage, and Dorota can probably comment on this, for instance, wildlife, the cost of maintenance and repair, obviously increase even though the miles might be low. And then also, if we keep the vehicles too long, of course, the resale value, because right now we get pretty good money for our vehicles. So actually, by the time we sell our vehicle, trade our vehicles, or someone purchased them, when we buy the vehicles, we're not actually paying the full cost. And also the warranty may run out. So obviously that is more cost. But I'll let Dorota add anything else to that.
I would, if I may, I would suggest that we not take the time right now. It's late to debate the vehicles, because I doubt that at this point you're going to get lots of support this afternoon at 5 to 5 for vehicles. So it's probably not going to be the most effective time for making the pitch. But I also think that the fact is there are going to be here, so in the environment that we are in, we are going to have to step back and make so many different assumptions about what is going on with revenues and our expenses and the town's operations next year, that a lot of tough choices are going to have to end up being made, and vehicles are only one of them. So I think vehicles we're going to get into that discussion, but I think we're going to end up having bigger issues here before we pour this budget on what does and doesn't get spent on next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dorota, can I just ask one thing? Chris had asked a question. I didn't get a chance to chime in quick enough with regards to Brian's budget, 285. A lot of that expense that he's put in, we don't know the cost, but it's for the garage. We're having some issues with the garage. And so right now, the way that it was graded, I don't know if you remember, but the garage was having problems with the water. Thought that we had fixed it, but come to find out the way that it was graded, we're having water flow back into the garage. And so that we don't know the cost, and I don't think it's going to be that much, but part of that was with regards to that cost. The bulk of it is with regards to the municipal center, replacing some dead trees, and also and some of our garage doors were having some leaking problems, and then in the car wash bay. That's it. That's all.
Yes, the 25, based on well, and Brian, I think he just, like he said, it's a placeholder, 25,000 for it, but I did not mention there's another item that Stephanie just mentioned. We also have in the maintenance, $75,000 for landscaping for for the municipal center, which
And you put it in your notes. It's in your notes.
it is.
Yeah, it is.
It is in my notes. I'm sorry, I just missed that, but and our debt service, which is a payment for the our bond, is also included in the budget. So with all this, I want to go back to this fund balances, and again, this is just based on a scenario that July 1st, everything operates and it was. So we would end up with about 20 million back in our reserves with those expense requests that I just presented to you. You have a detail for all the funds and in the spreadsheet that I send you. The only other thing, I don't know if you want to look, if you look at the department cost, it's pretty much, you see some increases, but they justify by, for example, communication has a big one, but 100,000 of it is the new website request for the website redesign. This is community development services. So, I mean, it varies, but it's the biggest one is the parkway or the maintenance for the parkway and new landscaping. So once you take that out, it's the departmental expenses are pretty much in line for it was this year.
But Dorota, excuse me, at the end of the day, if I do my math right, and I realize this budget, we're going to have to do a lot of work because of the changing environment. But what I estimate here is once you take out the major capital expenditures for this year and for next year, which in a which we all know in the corporate world get capitalized, but towns have to put them in on a cash basis. That if you take those out, we still appear like we're spending about $500,000 more in 2020-21 than we did this year. Is that right? That's what I
yes, because you want to take yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's of no doubt we're gonna have to at some point here recognize the different environment we're in, and I don't think we're going to end up in that spot.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely look at this, but again, 145,000 is the personal cost. There is the maintenance cost, but that includes again those are plugs for 75,000 for landscaping, 25,000. So we don't know those numbers yet, but we can, once we prepare, I look at that, like I said, for the next meeting, I will work on the financial statements and get the projections or a better feel for the projections. And maybe next month we'll have a better feel for what we can budget on the revenue side. Because I think that's the main thing right now, to know what we have to spend before we spend it.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to suggest, and Dorota, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, but ultimately, in my role, I have it's my responsibility to bring forth a budget to the town council for approval. And obviously, we're in a very different environment right now. So I think I would like to ask the whole town council kind of make a few tweaks in the process here, because right now there are just way too many uncertainties, particularly on the revenue side, as to where we are going to end up. I mean, it's pretty clear from Dorota's numbers that the fourth quarter is going to take a hit in terms of accommodation taxes. And I realize that, in the old days, people used to look at it and say, well, that's fine, but that's not operations. That's money that's spent on arts councils and other things. but that's not the case anymore. A lot of our operations are funded by that, including beach patrol and deputies and so on. So I think what I will talk to Stephanie and Chris as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I think what I'd like to do is at least put out there the thought that we will operate on a little bit tighter and delayed time frame for approving the budget, because I don't think in our normal approach that we're ready on June 1st to do a first reading of a budget. So I think what I would probably propose is that we aim for the May Ways and Means Committee as the first, as the Ways and Means review and approval of the budget, and that we have the first reading on at our normally scheduled June council meeting, and that we then schedule 15 days later, we schedule the second reading. So we compress that, and that way we are operating with, hopefully in May, a lot better visibility into what the situation economics are going to look like. What I also would like to do, I think, is to ask Dorota and Chris, again, as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, to basically take the lead here. And I think we're going to need to do a much deeper dive, first of all, into the whole revenue side of this. My conversations, as preliminary as they are, with different entities on the island, suggest that even if this event turns around by the end of May, that that the operations, the economics and operation in this community are going to be impacted for a significant amount of time. And it isn't just accommodations taxes, but it's other activity as well. So I think what I am probably going to ask is, I think we're going to have to look at a couple scenarios. I think we're going to have them really spend some time getting a better understanding of what we think a worst case revenue would look like, as well as what we think is realistic. And I think that we're going to need to have them bring back to the council potentially some tough decisions, because I'm not comfortable right now that this is going to add up so nicely. And I think there's the potential that we're going to have to make some choices about things, whether it be $700,000 for landscaping the parkway, or whether it be some of the discretionary. And I'm not prejudging anything, but we may have to make some decisions around things like Arts Council and how big a year is it. Some of our other discretionary spending, the whole accommodations tax and how much the town asks and gets from those monies. So I think what I'm suggesting here is that what I'd really like to do, and I've got Stephanie doing so many things right now. I think what I'd like to do is to just ask that Dorota and Chris, between now and mid-May, work to really dive into these numbers and ultimately aim at bringing us at the May Ways and Means Committee, probably unless something just changes radically, probably 2 cases of maybe a recommended or a budget and a worst case budget that helps posture the discussion for whether there are some tough decisions we're going to make, because I'm not real comfortable that some of these revenue, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not comfortable that some of these revenues are going to be there.
And again, I did, this is with the assumption everything, this is the best case scenario.
Oh, right. I believe, Dorota, you've done a great job, and I think the numbers that you're using here are the numbers that 3 weeks ago none of us would have batted an eye at, and aren't unnecessarily reasonable based on what we know. But I just think we're gonna have to look at this differently.
Hey, we can always cut the compensation for the town council members.
That's true. As a matter of fact, I volunteered to give it up this year.
Actually, I'm with you there.
Okay, we'll do. We'll have something for May Ways and Means.
Great.
Having said that, I didn't want to stop the conversation. I mean, you guys have seen a lot here. I am interested in, I think Dorota and Chris both would be interested in hearing any immediate reactions or questions or concerns that
Yeah.
you have on what you see.
I've been asking Dorota questions that I had, so most of mine have been answered by her presentation, which is really very good as usual.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, Dorota does a great job. The whole staff does a great job. I think, though, Craig is correct. We are a long way from knowing what the outcome of this year is going to look like.
Mhm.
And I do think we need a batten down the hatches option to consider for next year and have it in place, because it is not clear where the end point of this situation is going to be. And you know, I find the current outlook, if I just looked at the 2021 budget, I would say that's really nice, but it's not realistic at this point, in my mind. So we've got to plan some changes. And I think some of it is big things like, you know, is it time under these circumstances to re-landscape, you know, the parkway? I think it was time to pave it. There is no doubt in my mind about that, but I'd be concerned about 770 to re-landscape it. Anyway, stuff like that. We got to look at that stuff. And I'm sure, Chris, you and Dorota can do a great job in working what those options might be.
If I can just add one thing with regards to, and I know this will be a discussion that Dorota and Chris will have, and we'll hopefully have some more numbers for them. So in regards to the landscape, yeah, so that information that actually the RFP is going out today. And as council had asked, they are going to be able to come back with some options based on, it's basically divided into 3 different sections. So if you all, so when we're looking at the budget, hopefully we'll have that information to plug in.
So they're going to phase it in.
Other comments on the budget? Okay.
Okay, so let me.
All right. And Dorota, great job as you always do. And I think this is going to be a real challenging next.
Oh, yeah. It will be. Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to town, well, let's go ahead. Town administrator report. At 5:10, Stephanie, how do you have to tell us?
No, I don't have anything. I just wanted to know if you will be able, if you plan on commenting on the governor's order related to the beach. We're getting a lot of comments.
Yeah, I'll speak to that just a second.
I have nothing.
Any one of you guys want to deal with my wife who expects me to go to the grocery store?
No.
And no sympathy
I
either.
thought not.
Yeah, you can go by yourself.
Right.
Always
It's after,
do, I always
it's after
do.
5 o'clock, so you may be in line.
Thank you.
So Stephanie, no, nothing else on administrative report. Council members, either any committee updates or general comments. I'll start. Claus.
Nothing.
Mary Ann.
I have one very quick. At one of our last meetings, we were asked about the AirMed Care Network and where it served. And they do have 320 locations all over the United States, and that represents 38 states. And if you go online, you can find out the exact states. That's it.
Okay. Dan.
Oh, nothing to add. Thank you, Craig.
Chris.
Nothing. Craig, I'm good.
Hey, I just two things I want to comment real quickly. One, I just want to go back because sometimes I don't always pick up my missed comments or whatever till I read them in the Island Connections. In our conversation on the rentals, I do want to be absolutely clear because we spent a lot of time talking about, the people who are clearly not getting with are not doing the right thing and are violating what we've asked. And I don't want it to sound out of perspective relative to the whole 13 to 1,400 rentals. We have every reason to believe that the majority of our short-term property owners have been excellent with this. They understand the rationale for the decisions the town made. They have participated readily. The major property managers like the resort and Acres Alice and Pam Harrington and Vicasa and others have been very cooperative and very helpful. I've had some individual, just without belaboring it, I had an email just yesterday from a couple who pointed out that they have a rental here, and as important as that income is to them, they made the decision on their own about 3 weeks ago to pull their property off the market all the way through September because they just concluded that it was not the right thing to do for the community. And I think we have to reflect that that's still what we see from a great many, if not a majority. So I don't want to leave any impression that somehow the majority of our rental owners are the problem here. Everything it's always the 80-20 rule, and it's 20% that give you all kinds of hell. So I just don't want to leave any impression that somehow we spent an hour dissing all of our short-term rentals owners, because I think the bulk of them have been great, are doing the right thing, and their intentions are in the right place. But having said that, we have others that are not, and we absolutely have a responsibility to do that. Stephanie mentioned the beach. A couple questions about whether there was anything in the governor's action yesterday that impacts the use or access of people to Kiowa's Beach, and the answer to that is no. People must remember that unlike some other communities that have public beaches, Kiowa's is a private beach with the exception of Beachwalker Park, and as a consequence, all of our accesses to the beach are private. The governor a week ago made a action which closed public accesses to the beach, and so that has impacted communities like Folly Beach and Isla Palms and others in terms of the use that people have, and we're in a different situation. As the governor stressed in his message yesterday, that his order, which I think is one that I know is one that we all support. I think everybody absolutely supports the overarching message that at this particular point in time, what people ought to be doing to the extent they can is stay home. But the governor also stressed that in that order, he was not changing any other or adding to any of his other orders to this point. He was not making any other businesses, activities off limits. And so from the standpoint of our beach, there is nothing in the governor's order that changes in the use or access that people have to the beach. Having said that, we have a beach patrol. That beach patrol continues and will continue to monitor that beach to make sure that people are complying with all of the requirements of safe distancing, including staying in small groups, keeping apart. And I've been on the beach a lot over the last couple of weeks to see what's actually happening. And unless I'm hitting the wrong times, I'm seeing people who are really making an effort to show the proper distancing, to stay in small groups and do the right things. I did talk to Stephanie today that the tenor, the spirit of the governor's message is that we should be staying at home. that there is the opportunity. He does say, obviously, that people can and should be outdoors for exercising and such things. That it probably was not consistent with the desire to have people stay home for us to be keeping the Island franchise, umbrella and chair franchise in operation right now. Both the resort and the beach club have packed their stuff away and are not providing those services. And so I am talking to Stephanie about looking at our franchise agreement, and I think the view is that it would be consistent with the expectations of the governor that we suspend that operation, or ask the owner to suspend that operation for the duration of this. But otherwise, the beach is operation has not changed, and I hope that answers, I think, the questions that we've been getting. Stephanie, is that, any other questions you've been getting that I need to address before we close?
No, I've been answering some questions, and that's the only other question I received.
I didn't hear.
We're good.
Okay. Any last comments, questions?
I do. Mayor Cert has notified us they'd be willing to help out with the Harris Teeter people waiting outside if they need crowd control.
I'm looking at my email as we go here also. I saw that message. We need to address, and I think when we get together tomorrow to pass whatever action, we need to at that point talk about who can and what would be the appropriate form of enforcement. My question would be, and if we pass it, does it really need to be a code compliance person or something? So we can address that. Anything else? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll move. Second.
Second. I'm going to assume everybody's voting yes. See y'all later. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. Thanks.